Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. I know some of you are here with us earlier this week, and we really appreciate you being here. Today, we're going to, just to introduce myself for anybody who's new, I'm Francesca Webb. I'm the clerk of the board here at SANDAG, and I'll be one of your MCs this morning, along with my co-host, Robin Wapner. This morning, we'll be talking about the 2021 regional plan, and I'm going to hand it over to Robin to tell you a little bit more about this morning. Robin?
Thank you, Francesca, and good morning to everyone. Welcome to our final day of the 2021 member orientation. We really hope that you found this week useful. We're so glad to see so many people participating and staying with us through this whole time, especially today. So I just want to spend a little bit of time kind of setting the scene because we're really coming full circle today. On Tuesday, for those of you that were with us, Julie started off the orientation talking about all of the different hats that we wear at SANDAG, all of our roles and responsibilities. And one of the primary hats that we wear is as a metropolitan planning organization. Now, this is important because this is what gives us our charge to develop the long-range transportation plan for our region, otherwise known as a regional transportation plan, or as we call it here in San Diego, our regional plan. Then yesterday, we heard from our team about how does the regional transportation plan or the regional plan tie into all of our other programming and funding documents like the RTIP or our annual budget. And today, we're going to bring it all together and really dig into the regional transportation plan, how we put it together, and where we're going next. This is especially important because next week, our team will be going to the Board of Directors on Friday, February 12th, to talk about how we're turning our regional plan vision into the plan itself. Staff, the community, our board, we have literally spent years working on this plan, and it's now coming to fruition. By the end of this year, you board members are going to be asked to adopt our 2021 regional plan. And so today, we have 3 hours to get you all caught up and up to speed. I'm just kidding. There's a lot to cover. We're not expecting you to absorb everything, but hopefully this at least gives you some level of foundation so you know the questions to ask and are ready for the conversation that's about to come next week and throughout the rest of the year. And as we've been letting you know throughout the entire course of the orientation, we are all here as a resource for you to help you learn and have the information that you need to make the informed decisions that you're going to be being asked to make. So the one thing that I do hope you take away from today's session is one, obviously the importance of the regional plan, and two, the importance of kind of going back to our hat theme, putting on your regional hat when we have this conversation. The regional plan really is the ecosystem of our region, or maybe it's better to think of it as the nervous system. If one part of the nervous system is not working, it affects the whole body. And so when you think about the regional plan, we want you to focus on the outcomes. How does it all come together? The 5 big moves you've hopefully heard about, and if you haven't before today, you will learn about them today. How do we bring all of those together to help the region operate as one in the most impactful way that we can? This is, as I said before, one of the most important charges that we have as an agency and you as board members. So I hope you're excited. I know that we are. We're going to jump straight into it with our regulatory requirements and some of the modeling that we do to put the plan together. So I'm going to hand it over to Elisa. As always, please don't hesitate to raise your hands, jump in with any questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. Thanks again for joining us. Over to you, Elisa.
Thank you, Robin, and good morning. All a pleasure to be here again with you. If we can, perfect. So yesterday, for those who were here, I mentioned that my accent is from Argentina. And I told you a little bit about my professional journey here in California and at SANDAG. So let me go back to Argentina for a minute and make a connection to the regional plan. I grew up in Buenos Aires, a city of about 3 million people, the capital of Argentina, and surrounded by a much larger metropolitan area. I had a part-time job while I was going to college, had a full social life with all the opportunities that a large and a vibrant city have to offer. And I didn't own a car. I took the subway, I took buses, I took trains, I took taxi cabs, and I walked. And I could get every place I wanted to go. When I look at the San Diego region, the regional plan that we're developing, I cannot get this really hopeful feeling that in our region, in the most urban areas, people will also be able to get around conveniently without owning a car like I did. In fact, I didn't learn to drive until I came to California. And I hope that we can provide that level of convenient mobility to people as we implement the vision for the 2021 regional plan. Today's session, I'm sharing with three of my colleagues. Keith Greer also is going to be presenting on some of the state requirements. He manages our environmental programs. Pat Landrum, he's the manager for data solutions, and Rick Curry, our manager of transportation analysis, are going to talk to you about the data, the tools, the models that we use as we develop the regional plan. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what is a regional plan. And the regional plan is really the long-range blueprint for transportation investments in our region. It's a plan that basically casts a sustainable future for the region. As Robin mentioned, SANDAG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we are required to prepare this plan. And these plans are governed by both state and federal laws. And one of the requirements is that SANDAG update and adopt a plan every 4 years. So let me give you a little background on the past and current regional plans. In 2015, the board adopted San Diego Forward, the regional plan. That meant that in 2019, we were required to have a new plan adopted. In 2019, the board also took action to develop a bold, transformative vision for the next regional plan. So in order to remain compliant with both state and federal requirements, SANDAG took a dual path. Assembly Bill 1730 extended the timeline for developing the regional plan by 2 years through the end of 2021. That way, we remain compliant with the state laws, and we're able to continue receiving critical funding to the region. And also in 2019, the board adopted the federal regional transportation plan to meet federal requirements and again, be able to continue receiving federal funds into the region. A compliant regional plan is necessary to advance and implement the bold and transformative regional vision. So why does this matter? It basically is the vehicle that allows the region to receive critical funding to implement projects. Projects have to be included in a regional plan to be able to be programmed for funding. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the state and federal mandates. And the California Transportation Commission is an agency that puts together, compiles all the state and federal requirements for regional planning, a guidelines document. And there's a checklist, an exhaustive checklist that we have to submit with our plan that goes to the commission, to Caltrans, and to federal agencies, showing that we meet all the requirements. This slide instead focuses on key state and federal mandates. Regarding climate, state laws require that SANDAG develop a sustainable communities strategy as part of the regional plan that shows how the plan is going to meet greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets that are established by the California Air Resources Board. Regarding air pollution, Assembly Bill 805 introduced a new requirement for our regional plan, and the plan has to identify transportation strategies to reduce exposure to air pollution in disadvantaged communities. And at the federal level, we also have air quality requirements. The pollutant of issue in our region is ozone or smog, so the plan has to show how it's going to help meet those federal ozone standards. Regarding social equity, we will bring in the board a deep dive into the social equity framework and our work for the regional plan in March. But just to give you an overview, the plan has to be compliant with Title VI of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, and also with environmental justice considerations that also include low-income populations. We developed both a Title VI and an environmental justice analysis for the regional plan. And both state and federal laws require that we conduct a robust public participation process and also include consultation with our tribal governments. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state's climate commitments, and this includes both laws and goals. So moving on to the next bullet, the Senate Bill 32 is a law that requires the California Air Resources Board to ensure a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of 40% by 2030. Executive orders also have goals to reduce the statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050. There's also an executive order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, and the newest executive order relates to the sales of new vehicles that will be 100% zero emission by 2035. So next, let me show you a little bit about why California focuses so much on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. This chart shows the total California greenhouse gas emissions by sector. And as you can see, transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions with 41%. The other two sectors that follow are the industrial and electricity sectors. And the California Resources Board has put together a suite of regulations to reduce emissions from fuels, from vehicles, and also from the transportation system. Fuel providers have to meet low carbon fuel standards to transition to cleaner fuels. Automakers have to meet zero emission vehicle regulations. And SANDAG, as I mentioned, is subject to Senate Bill 375 and regional greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. The 5 big moves that you're going to hear about represent these interrelated strategies to meet climate targets in our region. Next, I'm going to describe another requirement that the California Air Resources Board has, and it is to report on the progress that the state as a whole is making in meeting those greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are given to all metropolitan agencies in the state. Let me walk you through this chart. The green dots that you're going to see show the anticipated performance of all the sustainable communities strategies in the state in 2020 and in 2035. The next line that you're going to see, the yellow line, shows the change in per person travel or vehicle mass travel, and the blue line shows the change in per person greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicles. And as you can see, after the Great Recession and the rebound of the economy, both miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions also rebounded. The state as a whole is not on track to meet the greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. And in fact, as you can see, they're trending in the wrong direction. The report concluded that the state won't be able to meet its climate goals without really reducing growth in single occupant vehicle activity. In the next slide, I'm just going to focus a little bit more on our requirements as SANDAG, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And the California Air Resources Board is the agency that sets those emission reduction targets for the metropolitan areas. The first targets that we were given were for the 2011 and 2015 plans, and that was a 13% reduction in passenger vehicle greenhouse gas emissions or CO2 per capita. Now, in 2018, the California Air Resources Board reviewed and revised those targets for all metropolitan regions. And for the San Diego region, we have now a more ambitious target of a 19% reduction. In the next slide, I'm going to show you what are the strategies that SANDAG as a Metropolitan Plan Organization can use to show achievement of those targets that were given by the California Resources Board. And there's basically 6 building blocks. The land use pattern, and basically, looking at multifamily, transit-oriented development, mobility hubs, transportation network, a multimodal system, and we're building that system around the 5 big move strategies. Also managing the demand of the transportation system, think of carpools, van pools, the systems management, and here what we're talking about is basically managing the efficiency of the transportation system. Think of the ramp meters, the freeway ramps, optimizing traffic signals, also signal priority for transit vehicles. We can also use pricing strategies like the I-15 express lanes or for instance, parking pricing, and also vehicle technologies, say charging stations for electric vehicles, enhanced mobility with flexible fleets. So those are all the strategies that we can use to basically show emission reductions that come from the transportation system, land use, and housing. So the regional plan has to demonstrate that we will be meeting those emissions reduction standards. And again, the 5 big moves are those 5 interrelated strategies that are going to help us meet the climate targets. Keith Greer is going to talk next about additional state requirements for transportation. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome to all the new board members. So I want to spend a few minutes of time to talk about SB 743 and why it matters. So both as a SANDAG board member and as an elected official for your jurisdictions, you will be hearing a lot about this new bill, SB 743, as you consider land use and transportation projects in their approval. So many of you have probably heard about the California Environmental Quality Act. That's the state law that requires local and state jurisdictions to evaluate the impacts of projects on the environment prior to their approval. So I've been practicing CEQA now for over 30 years, and I would say SB 743 is arguably one of the biggest changes to occur to CEQA in the last 20 years. So it's a huge change in how business is done as we evaluate the impacts on the environment. So after 7 years, after multiple hundreds of workshops on 743, it finally went into effect on July 1st. And there's probably 2 main takeaways for board members. The first is it's a change in methodology for how we're evaluating impacts on the transportation system. And the second, the reason why it's being done is to promote the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, the reduction of traffic-related air pollution, to promote multimodal transportation systems, and provide a clean, efficient access to destinations. And that's going to be a recurring theme as you start hearing about our 21 regional plan. So in a nutshell, SB 743 changes how SANDAG in each local jurisdiction evaluates transportation and land use projects. So what actually did SB 743 do? Next slide. So under SB 743, in the past, when we looked at the transportation system under CEQA, you'd evaluate the actions of the project and how it contributed to congestion. That is to say, how would it contribute to traffic? Would it create more traffic? Would it help alleviate traffic? You probably recall driving down the road and going over one of those rubber hoses. It goes bump. Those hoses actually count the volume of cars on a street and is used to determine what they call level of service. So just like grades in school, level of service has a rating from A, really good, to F, really bad. So what's changed? Next slide. Under SB 743, automobile delay is no longer considered a significant impact on the environment. So traffic is considered a nuisance to the humans, but it's not considered an impact to the environment. The state has moved away and from level of service to a new metric, VMT, or vehicle miles traveled. And this measures the cumulative amount of travel for all vehicles in a geographic range over a period of time. So simply said, if you have 1 car driving 1 mile, that's 1 VMT. 10 cars driving 10 miles, 100 VMTs. So pretty simple, but it's a radical change in how we look at transportation impacts. So why was this done? Next slide. So research has shown that good grades in transportation does not mean level of service does not equate success in transportation planning. So the simplest way to think about this is look at the image on the left here. This is an image in Irvine. It's got big, wide streets, but anywhere you want to go requires you to jump in your car and drive. You can just imagine at lunchtime, all the workers here jump in the car, drive 15 minutes to lunch or to run an errand. So there's a high level of service, but low accessibility shops and other services. Next slide. Let's compare that. This is a slide of a more urban area. Yes, there's more congestion, but there's more restaurants and services within walking distance. So while the level of service is lower, accessibility is much higher. And this was looked at through multiple cities throughout the United States by Office of Planning and Research of the state, and they found that the VMT is a better metric than using a level of service. Next slide. So Elisa talked about the state's climate sustainability goals. And in order to meet those, the legislature looked at 10 years worth of where they're headed with trying to achieve those goals. And they realized that the promoting infill development with a diverse land use and coupling that with increased mobility choices will, next slide, reduce greenhouse gas and air and traffic related air pollutants. So what this really is a move towards a better connected land use and transportation system. And it happens to be the foundation of our proposed 21 regional plan, which will be presented later on today by Sandiag's Regional Planning Director, Colleen Clementson. I'm very excited about the 21 regional plan. I think it is a tremendous move for the positive in terms of meeting our climate goals and meeting our state goals. So SB 743 is just one of the tools to do that. So how is this going to be accomplished? So the state, remember those rubber hose counts I was talking about? We've moved towards regional transportation models like Sandag's activity-based models, which are helped to generate vehicle miles traveled or VMT across the whole region or across cities or communities, either way. So what the state has said is based upon their research, next slide, that if you have a project that is less than 15% of the average VMT for that region or that city or that community, there's no significant impact under CEQA. Meaning it expedites that review. You don't need to do anything else. So it helps those projects in low VMT areas to move faster. If you're above that 15% of average, then you may have a significant impact, requires additional analysis and possibly mitigation measures to reduce VMT. It gets complicated really quick. So the first part, to make this easier, Sandag has created an online tool that assists local jurisdictions and consultants with making that determination for VMT on a given area. You will see that VMT is based upon regional transportation models. And Mr. Rick Curry will be discussing Sandag transportation modeling efforts. Rick?
Hi, Keith, Rick. I'm just going to jump in here real quick. Let us take a breath and see if any of our members have any clarifying questions, thoughts, comments before we move on. I know we're covering some technical information today. I want to make sure we don't move too quickly through all of this. Councilmember Rodriguez, good morning. I'm sorry, Councilmember, were you talking? I don't know if it was just me that couldn't hear you. Kendall, Arthur, can anyone hear the council member?
Robin, his hand is down now. I heard some muffled background noise, but his mic is now turned off and the hand went down.
Okay, thanks, Arthur. Oh, I think we can do that one more time, council member. Say something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Really quick. This is a umbrella question. Just the more presentations I'm seeing, a lot of it is obviously science and data driven, which I greatly appreciate. In my line of work, data is everything, and if depending on the quality of the data, you get the results. And so my question has to do with in our region, being with Camp Pendleton, we have a lot of, from demographics, income levels, traffic, using our streets. Camp Pendleton heavily is a part of Oceanside. And even on the regional map, Camp Pendleton is kind of clustered into our region. So how is the data from Camp Pendleton utilized in the decision making so that we can get adequate resources in Oceanside?
I think that's a great question. Unless one of our panelists want to jump in, I think we may want to reserve that for our next presentation by Ray Major, our chief economist, who's going to talk all about data and how we use it. Let me just do a check from our panelists. Does anyone have anything to add right now?
I would add that we work closely with the military to try to obtain employment data, residential data. So we try to always incorporate the travel patterns of our military installations in the region.
Thank you, Lisa. Councilmember, I'll send a note to Ray right now so he's ready to respond to your question.
And one more note, Robin. So this is Rick Curry, our travel modeler. We also calibrate our transportation model to the gate counts for Camp Pendleton. So we try to account for all the travel to and from the military bases.
Okay, and this may be another call, but when I look at like the data that Sandag has for Oceanside, it seems like it's missing a lot of that information. And so this may be an off the line conversation. But when we're looking at VMT, for example, that's why I brought it up. Are Camp Pendleton's impacts affecting that VMT?
Keith, do you know the answer to that?
It's not a quick answer. Probably it's a great discussion for Rick and I to have with the council member offline.
Okay.
Because there's pass-through VMT that's also calculated. And so we'll take that offline.
Perfect. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Okay, and we'll have more time for discussion once the presentation is done. Rick, I'll let you get started.
And actually, Pat's going to take it away first.
Pat, over to you.
Before I send the presentation over to Rick, I wanted to talk about kind of the segue that previously was mentioned about data. And one addition to that is we currently are undertaking a grant to improve the coordination of data, particularly with the Navy. And we believe it'll open the doors for helping facilitate better data coordination with respect to socioeconomic data, transportation data in the future. So we are working toward that as we speak. My name is Pat Landrum. I manage our data solutions team here at Sandag. I work closely with our socioeconomic forecasting and transportation modeling teams to help create the data foundation upon which Sandag's suite of transportation forecasting tools are built. For some history, Sandag began developing transportation forecast back in 1981. Our first demographic forecast was actually 10 years before that in 1971. We've been at this for a very long time. Over the years, our transportation models have evolved as the questions we attempt to answer become more complex. The data requirements have increased, and the complexity of the software and supporting IT infrastructure have grown exponentially. This slide underscores the importance of our modeling tools in the delivery of travel forecasts to the region, that we're the go-to resource to support transportation modeling needs of our member agencies. So when you need a forecast for weather, you ask weather.com. When you need a forecast for travel, you ask Sandag. And we really are passionate about that. We invest a lot of time and energy. We have a very talented team. Some of our members have been working in this area for around 20 to 25 years together here at Sandag. So we really do invest a lot of time and resources to both build the data foundation and build the modeling suite of tools that we deploy here at Sandag. In order to develop the forecasted data needed to evaluate how transportation investments and policy decisions, land use changes affect the generation of VMT and GHG as described by Elisa and Keith, And to produce a wide range of other performance indicators, SANDAG has developed and we maintain an activity-based model, or ABM. So what is a transportation model? At a very high level, a transportation model is an analysis platform that translates complex behavioral relationships into forecasts of travel. It creates a future projection based on observed data, surveys of our residents, their travel behavior, and the travel choices that they make. And we also collect a tremendous amount of observed data on the performance of the entire transportation system. These transportation models are required by state and federal law to assess the planning needs of the region. The guidance for the use of transportation models comes through the California Transportation Commission and via SB 375. And there's a requirement for making federal air quality conformity determinations as well. The development and use of these activity-based models, such as the one deployed by SANDAG, is recommended through this guidance for MPOs in regions where population is greater than 2 million and for air quality non-attainment areas. We do find comfort in that SANDAG is not alone with respect to the use of activity-based models. The 4 major MPOs in the state of California also maintain and use an activity-based model, as do 20 of the 26 other major MPOs nationwide. Prior to each software release, SANDAG conducts a peer review of the ABM. We convene an expert panel comprised of MPO practitioners, private sector, and academia subject matter experts. The current version of the ABM software platform, ABM 2+, was reviewed last March here at SANDAG prior to the stay-at-home orders due to the pandemic. And also, to ensure transparency, we post all of our model documentation and software code in the public domain on GitHub. And we can add the link to the documentation in the chat if folks are interested. So SANDAG performs transportation analysis activities beyond the regional plan development context as well, including support for local jurisdiction general plan and community plan updates, corridor studies, climate action planning, SB 743 analysis, and local development project impact analysis. Next slide, please. In order to support the data and assumption needs of activity-based models, SANDAG's activity-based model, SANDAG begins at the foundational level by maintaining a land inventory system. This system is maintained using geographic information system software and is updated on an annual basis. It is sub-parcel based. That means we take a very detailed look within a given parcel to determine what types of uses exist at the parcel level, including dwelling units, jobs, open space, transportation, parking lots, etc. It also includes site level employment data derived from EDD, the California Employment Development Department, as well as other sources. And we have buildings and building characteristics across the region. We also coordinate with our member agency partners to obtain scheduled development information and future development capacity for each jurisdiction at the parcel level. And these are key baseline inputs as we develop the regional forecast, the regional growth forecast. Next slide, please. The regional growth forecast is managed by David Tedrow, who is our economic and demographic analysis and modeling team lead. The forecast is developed every 4 years to coincide with the regional transportation plan. Key information generated by the regional forecast includes population, households, housing units, and jobs classified by the unique characteristics associated with each data type, such as for population, age, race, income, dwelling units by type, and jobs by sector and the number of employees. This forecast data is translated into key ABM inputs, including a simulated population for every person in the region, sub-area level forecast information by year, including the location and characteristics of future housing, jobs, education, and other key input assumptions. Next slide, please. To ensure that ABM is calibrated to represent observed travel behavior and system performance for the base year, SANDAG collects a wide range of data, including survey data, what we call original data collection here at SANDAG, which is managed by Dr. Cindy Burke's research and program management team. This includes household travel behavior, onboard transit, census ACS journey to work, regional transit, cross-border information, parking, commercial vehicle information, and market research, to name a few. We also collect observed system performance data from a wide range of publicly available and third-party vendor data. This includes roadway speeds, traffic counts, transit passenger counts, vehicle occupancy and classification, as well as border wait times. So as you can see, the SANDAG activity-based model requires a significant amount of data development activities in order to prepare the input needed to run the model. Our teams collaborate throughout the data development lifecycle, both internally with our local jurisdiction partners, both internally and with our local jurisdiction partners, to ensure we compile the best available and most accurate data assumptions. With that, I would now like to turn things over to my colleague, Rick Curry, to take a bit of a deeper dive into how SANDAG applies the activity-based model to perform the transportation forecasting analysis that is required, mentioned in the previous slides, with respect to VMT and GHG. Rick?
Thanks, Pat. So again, my name is Rick Curry. I am the manager of our transportation analysis and application section. We do the travel modeling for the agency. I'm here today to present one of the most sophisticated transportation models in the nation. I hope to do it justice in the 10 minutes that I have. There are 4 key takeaways I hope you get from this presentation. The system we use is advanced, complex, and sophisticated. The travel model is based on and compared to local travel data. The model encompasses all travel in the region. The model is ready to analyze the mobility options proposed in this visionary plan. So SANDAG uses an activity-based model, also known as an ABM, to forecast travel for the regional plan. This means that the travel behavior in the model is predicated on activities such as going to work and school that people do throughout the day. The first version of the ABM was used in the 2015 regional plan, and the second version was used in the 2019 federal RTP. The current version I'll be describing today is an enhanced version of our second generation ABM. The ABM has been tailored specifically to meet SANDAG's analytical needs. It considers current and future plans, and it takes into account the unique travel demand that exists in the San Diego region. So how do we build an ABM? The model is based on observed local data that details the travel and decisions that people make. Travel surveys are the key source of information, and we augment them with other data sources where needed. That data is then used to estimate statistical models. Here in this slide, I'm showing some of the nested logit equations in our trip mode choice model that help determine the probability of choosing a mode of travel. I wouldn't be a travel modeler if I didn't show an equation within one of our presentations. Luckily for SANDAG, we have Dr. Wu Sun and his very talented team of developers and consultants who understand these equations and can help estimate these models. Dr. Sun's team also writes the custom software that we use. All of this software code is available publicly in SANDAG's software repository website that Pat mentioned, GitHub. We then calibrate the model to make sure those models are tuned to the conditions across the region. We use the observed data Pat mentioned to validate the model and ensure we are getting the right volumes, speeds, travel times, and transit usage. We also test the ABM to make sure the model responds to key policy and infrastructure changes that we intend to include in the plan. That's what we call sensitivity testing. After we are content internally with the model, we hold a national peer review where we invite in experts from across the country and from within our community to poke and prod at the results and give us their opinions. We held the last ABM 2+ peer review meeting, as Pat mentioned, just prior to the COVID shutdown. The 11-member advisory committee was comprised of nationally recognized leaders in the travel demand modeling field who come from a vast array of organizations such as FHWA, CARB, major MPOs within the state and within the nation, academia, and independent consultants. They conclude that the SANDAG ABM remained well above the state of the practice and that some of the components are state-of-the-art for travel demand models. After we address the comments from the peer review panel, we are then ready to apply the ABM for the regional plan. Next slide. Here I'm showing a simplified version of the ABM2 Plus flowchart. This is a peek inside the proverbial black box. I want to highlight a few key aspects. First, the ABM is not just one model. It's several models that account for the travel within our region. These models address all the different types of travel that may occur within our region. Residents who travel to work, school, going out to shop or to eat or visit with friends, at least when we used to be able to. Residents who leave the region to do those same activities, people from other areas of the state that travel to San Diego for the day to work or go to school or other purposes, residents of Mexico who cross the border by any mode and come to San Diego to shop, work, or visit family, people who travel into and out of the region through San Diego International Airport or CBX, visitors who come to San Diego for tourism, business reasons such as conventions, or to visit family and friends. We also include commercial travel, which includes good movement such as freight and deliveries, but also any business activities such as plumbers and electricians, realtors, business meetings, fleet vehicles for trash and mail and utilities. The second aspect I want to highlight is where we derive transit and vehicle impacts on our system. We take all the travel described above and load those trips onto our future network scenarios. We can then derive impacts and calculate the VMT in the region, estimate the GHG, the air quality, congestion levels, and ridership for our different transit lines. Next slide. So what's new within our ABM2 Plus? With the regional plan introducing new big ideas, we needed to retool the ABM to handle and assess new mobility options. We built in features to handle TNCs, micromobility, and microtransit. We worked with FHWA and added in improvements that help us model managed lane systems. We added newer components for travel markets. We calibrated and validated the model, including the use of big data sets. And we recalibrated the model using the latest behavioral survey data sets available. These surveys give us updates on how people in the region travel, how they use transit, some of their commute and telecommute behaviors, and the use of TNCs in the region such as Lyft and Uber. Next slide. So what influences travel in the ABM2 Plus? Well, I usually counter this question with what influences travel in the real world. Those same things influence the models as shown in this slide with the cogs in the funnel. The purpose of the ABM is to provide a systematic method for the evaluation of potential transportation projects, land use, and policy alternatives. When we run the model, we take inputs of economic and growth forecasts, which include households and people and all their characteristics of demographics and income. This is critical for evaluating the social equity impacts of the plan. We take in employment and employment by occupation type and land use activities, networks of existing and proposed mobility solutions, and policies such as costs to use transit or to park or to pay a toll. How many occupants in a vehicle are considered to be an HOV, whether we'll improve traffic signal technology, and so on. We also include exogenous variables for the cost to drive, how many people are forecasted to use our airports or cross the border. Overall, there are 85 different sources of data used to create or run the ABM. So let me describe what it takes to run the model. We utilize close to 20 servers and running scenarios for projects and within our service bureau. A single model run will take us approximately 2 to 3 days of computer time to run. It produces around 100 gigabytes of data. We use a SQL Server database on the back end to manage scenarios and data. And we have staff members who are specialized in managing the database and writing scripts to create the performance metrics we need within the plan. Next slide. Finally, let me show you an example of a common corridor analysis we do using projects from a previous plan. After adding a multitude of infrastructure projects, we run the transportation model and assess some common metrics. We can look at how regional corridor VMT changes, how many more trips will be in the corridor, how travel time changes, and how trips that use adjacent facilities reroute to take advantage of a faster travel time path. For the regional plan and all the innovative projects and strategies, we follow a similar process for coding up the model, running and creating of performance metrics. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I wanted to reiterate the 4 key aspects I was hoping you would get from this presentation. One is that the model system we use is leading edge. It's based on observed data. It handles all the different travel markets in San Diego. And the ABM is ready to evaluate the plan you'll be hearing about in the following presentations. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Robin to facilitate any questions.
Thanks so much, Rick. I know we just covered a lot of ground. Like I said, very technical. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments? We're happy to follow up with you offline as well. I see a couple of hands here. Councilmember Shu.
Good morning, panelists and Robin. I have a kind of a 2-part question. One is activity-based modeling is, I know, one of the more popular modeling tools out there, but I know there are other modeling tools as well. So I'm kind of curious on why Sandag decided to stay with activity-based modeling as this base tool. Perhaps the changes you've made to it recently, +2, brings it up to a better system. So the follow-up question to that is, how is activity-based modeling, which is pretty much based on previous activities in our region, going to help us create the new mode shares and the new changes we need to make looking into the future? How is that going to help us change the region as much as we need to when we're looking back at previous activity, not the kind of activity we want in the future?
Sure. So let me describe just a little bit about the different types of models that are out there. Sandag used to use a trip-based model, which was very good at answering the questions that the region was asking at the time. So back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, the trip-based model gave us very good answers on travel on our regional facilities, but it didn't give us the complexity of information that we needed to answer social equity type questions. That's why Sandag and nearly every MPO, major MPO across the country has moved towards an activity-based model. There's a couple of different versions of activity-based models as well. We are part of sort of a family that's called the CT RAMP, which includes a number of different agencies across the country. There's other models that can also be used. Sometimes you'll hear about sketch planning tools that can give us sort of, in a way, a rapid response as far as how different policies might impact regional results. We also have another model at the agency called a DTA model, which is sort of a little bit closer to a meso or microscopic model that allows you to look at traffic operations. what we try to do is we try to tailor the tool that we use to the questions that we hear that are coming from the region, from the agency, and from our jurisdictions. And so right now we feel as though an activity-based model is the best model construct to answer those questions. So how does the model then, to the second part of your question, as far as how does it handle looking to the future towards some of these new mobility options? Well, one of the things that we look at is when we estimate these models, we're really looking at human travel behavior and how people interact with certain key variables such as travel time and travel cost. So even as we're introducing something new, such as tier 1 transit systems and high-speed transit, we're still looking at some of the same basic fundamentals of travel. How much does it cost? How easy is it to get there? How long does it take you? So we can implement those systems and still use that same basic travel behavior. There are areas where if we don't have a mode within the region, sometimes we need to look at and move and see from another area how people react, how people perceive that mode. And we try to introduce and assert those values within our model system. So there's a number of different ways that we handle it, but it's still all predicated based off of how people behave today, how people react to travel time and travel cost within our system. I will say there are areas that if travel behavior shifts greatly and people change their way of thinking, that's going to not necessarily play well within our system. So we had occurrences in the past where, for example, TNCs came in and we weren't quite ready for that in our model system. We didn't have that mode yet. Once we were able to collect more information on it, we were able to develop a model around how people use those systems, and now it's included. So as these systems come online, we incorporate them back into the model, and we are able to forecast the usage of that modal option.
Rick, I don't want to cut you off, but we have just a few more minutes and a couple more questions.
Yeah,
Council
I can go
member,
on
should
for
you not
hours.
get to the heart of your question, we're happy to follow up with you with more detail.
Thank you.
Okay,
Robin, if I may just, for the board members, good morning. Rick and his team are those behind the scene university, but they're the most important part of what we do here. To my council member Shu's question, and I think it's a legitimate one. It's first of all, it's hard to predict travel behavior, but we try our best to do it through data and information. I think if I take council member Shu's to the question, there is so much we cannot predict through just the models, regardless whether the activity-based, dynamic, etc. And I think Rick would agree. We try. And so we're in the process at SANDAG of building off-model tools, and Rick and his team are doing amazing in that. This is what we mean by, say, data-driven approaches. So yes, it's an activity-based model. Yes, it's peer-reviewed nationally. That's what major MPOs actually must use to comply with all the regulations. But we also have other tools that we're working on. They're not there, that could add to this and make it much more likely to predict some behaviors that could inform us about what kind of project we do moving forward. But I just want you to know this team, they don't know what weekend is and what holidays are. They're running 24/7, and I'm really proud of them.
thank you, Hassan. We'll all second that. Councilmember Edson.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. They aren't real deep. On slide 8, it demonstrated a significant upward trend in per person greenhouse gases. Is that attributed to, for example, a lower cost of cars and gas, or more driver's license availability due to change in state law, or something else?
There is a combination of factors, I would say, and that data is statewide. So we're looking, at very different regions in the state combined into that chart. But yeah, all those factors that you mentioned are likely to have an influence in them. But we're looking, at the Sacramento area, Los Angeles area, San Francisco Bay Area, and other areas that are less urban, like the Central Valley. So there's a combination of factors.
Okay, and then my second question was regarding travel surveys. So it was mentioned that a key source of information was travel surveys, and that there were 85 different sources of data. So with regard to the travel surveys, how wide is the demographic, and how many people are? I've never been asked to take a travel survey, so I'm just kind of curious as to who is responding.
Yeah, so for the travel surveys that we do, we try to match up the travel survey to encompass the demographics of the region. So we have certain control targets that we have to make sure that we are addressing different elements such as income, race, household size, car ownership. So we try to make sure we have enough people from each of those different areas that are providing a very rich sample for us to draw from for the model estimation. We can get you details on the last household travel survey that we did in 2016 and 2017. From the top of my head, I think we, don't quote me, I believe we had about 4,000 households and about 9,000 people who were a part of that. And I'm sure I got that completely wrong, but and our survey person, Grace Mino, is cringing in the background, but we can get you those details.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that rounds us up for this session. Thanks everyone for sticking in there with us. I know we went a little long. We're just going to take a couple minutes breaks to get ready, and then we will start off with Ray Major, our chief economist, to talk to you about all of the data that we're using to inform our regional plan and the difference that it's making this time around. We'll see you in a couple minutes.
Like what I'd like to do is first kind of just back up a little bit and talk about what data science is. And we've been doing analytics here at Sandag for 20 or 30 years, and it has matured significantly over that time period. But what's happened recently is that data and data science have just completely exploded, and it's rewriting how people are looking at every type of business, no matter what industry or field they're in. And we here at Sandag are also trying to reinvent the way we look at the work that we do to come up with better answers for you when it comes to regional planning and all of the other things that we're involved in. When you take a look at some of the places where big data is used, I mean, it's all around us, the data science. For instance, when you have your telephone, how many times has it come up and recommended a product to you based upon maybe a Google search that you had done? Well, that's data science being applied to marketing and e-commerce. Or when the bank calls you and says that there may be some fraud on your credit card. Well, how do they know that? They're using big data and data analytics and data science to figure out if the patterns of your shopping are different than they normally are. And if they see something that's anomalous, then they're going to call you. And so we do fraud detection also as data science. For instance, the drug discovery. So the COVID-19 vaccine that was developed so quickly, a lot of that was facilitated by data and data science. When we take a look at transportation, there's a tremendous amount of things that are coming in the transportation field, things like self-driving cars, and you've heard about all of these things, and enhanced safety and monitoring and all of these things. And all of that has to do with the fact that we can start now connecting together all of these different data collection points like automobiles and start analyzing this data through data science. And finally, things like in finance, for instance, algorithmic trading. You all heard about what happened with Robinhood and the GameStop stock. Well, that's algorithmic trading. That's, again, data science applied to that particular field. So data science is everywhere, and Sandag is going there too. So we'll be investing in data science in the year to come. But what really is data science? I mean, data science is not any one definable thing. It's really this interdisciplinary field where we take computer science, we take mathematics and statistics, and then we take all of these interesting new tools that are being developed, things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and research like the surveys that were being talked about earlier. And we combine that with our domain knowledge. So the last slide kind of showed different areas and they all have their domain knowledge. Our domain knowledge is about transportation. It's also about government, and it's about a lot of data that has to do with the San Diego region. What it allows us to do is to really start to find the cause of problems by asking the right questions. Earlier this year, you would have seen that we put out reports on COVID and which communities were hit the hardest. Well, that's data science being applied to our local region to really understand how COVID and unemployment were impacting our minority communities here in San Diego. We also take a look at exploratory data. And for instance, a concept that we created for the regional plan, which was employment centers, is something that came from really doing exploratory data. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that during this presentation. And then when we look at things like models and data using all of these algorithms, Rick went over those. And so I'm not going to go over the detailed algorithms unless you would really like to go through those. And then we also try to communicate and visualize these. And you've seen that Cindy Burke and I both put out reports constantly that are on the picked up by the news, for instance, because what we're doing is we're taking the data that we collect here at Sandag and we're creating a story behind it. So what is really a data scientist? The Harvard Business Review had an article that they published, which is Data Science, the Sexiest Job of the 21st Century. And this is meet the people who can coax treasures out of messy, unstructured data. And that's really what we're trying to do here at Sandag. But just one real quick quote that came from that article: data scientists are the key to realizing the opportunities presented by big data. They bring structure to it, find compelling patterns in it, and advise executives on the implications for product, process, and decisions. They find the stories buried in the data and communicate it. And they don't just deliver reports. They get at the questions, at the heart of the problems, and devise creative approaches to them. And so that's what we're trying to do. So data scientists, what do they look like? We need data scientists. So I went out to the internet and I Googled data scientist, and this picture comes up. Revenge of the Nerds. This is a young Ray Major from 25 years ago doing what was then called statistics. That was kind of data science at the time. And 25 years later, this is from TikTok, where I'm now being made fun of by 4.4 million people. So data science, nerd, it's still all the same. But this is what a data scientist looks like, in case you're wondering. But how do we apply all of this to the regional plan? We're really taking a bold new approach. When Hassan got here, what he wanted us to do is not to just build upon the old plan that we had continuously built upon for the last 20 years, but he wanted us to take a new approach, to use data to really understand the underlying infrastructure that we had currently in place, where people live, where they work, how they move around, and to really look at this from a completely new perspective and to look at this in a very objective way. Well, that's a great idea, but there are also constraints. So there were challenges that we needed to meet as we were doing this regional plan. We needed to look at congestion. We needed to solve it for that, and there are different ways to do that. We also needed to keep in mind all of our social equity goals that we have from the state and federal government, and then we had to look at the mandates that come from the state and federal government. So we needed to create a system that was faster, fairer, and cleaner. And the thing here is that it's really very easy to solve for any one of these equations, if you will. Like we could solve for congestion by widening every freeway, for instance, but that wouldn't meet the state and federal mandates when it comes to GHG reduction. Well, we could meet those by charging a tremendous amount for driving, and then what would happen is that nobody would drive and congestion would go down, but then that wouldn't meet social equity goals because then people who don't have money can't drive. So you got to balance all of this stuff, and really data and analytics are what we were using to really help create the system and balance it. We're looking at statewide problems, but we're also, the dialogue that we're having here at SANDAG is the same thing that we're talking about statewide. Everybody wants to lower GHG. We're looking at how do we reduce traffic deaths by creating a safer system? How do we reduce congestion? How do we optimize our land use? How do we create better life for our citizens? How will things like Uber and Lyft really change the last mile of people getting to alternate forms of transportation? We want to talk about things like how we can better serve mobility challenged residents. So all of these questions are there, and it's data that really comes up and feeds, it gives us the answer to many of these. This is the Analytic Continuum. And what this talks about is the complexity of the analysis versus the value of the information that we're providing. So for instance, at the lowest level, we have reporting, but reporting kind of tells us what happened. That's what it's meant to do. Above that, we have analysis, which talks about why something happened. Monitoring tells us what is happening now. Forecasting allows us to talk about what may happen based on historical data. And the interesting stuff is up here, predictive analytics, which allows us to figure out what possibly might happen. Much of this is based on real-time data. And then prescriptive analytics, which really tells us what action should be taken. So I'll just give you a really basic example, just so you can kind of understand how the value of the information becomes greater as we add more analytics to it through data science. And so a report would be something that you look at. It might be something like a traffic report that says where areas were congested, how many accidents there were, how many fatalities there were, and we could have this data back for many, many months and years, and we could do this for every day you could look at this, but you really can't take any action on it. This is just information. And this is what most of the time when people are looking at data, this is what you get. You get it in a report format. Above that, you have analysis. And this is when somebody like a data scientist will start looking at the data, or data analyst, and they'll start to try to understand, why did we have those accidents or fatalities? Why did we have the congestion in certain areas? And it may be that it was raining that day, or people were on their cell phones, or they weren't wearing seatbelts, and that's why we had higher fatalities and accidents. And so the analytics start to tell us why it happened, but we still can't take action on that. Now, monitoring starts to move us to a more interesting level, because what it's telling us is what's happening today. So I can take a look at weather conditions, for instance, and I can take a look at real-time traffic speeds and volumes, and this is all data that would be coming in. And by being able to monitor this, we can start to tell what's happening in real time. And then we can take a look at forecasts. What forecasts do is really take a look at what is happening in the future based on historical data. So for instance, we may have an annual increase or decrease in congestion accidents, and we're trying to understand, well, what is going to happen in the future? What would happen next year, the year after that, and after that? And we do that by applying statistical methods that would give us information on what may happen. We use forecasting here at SANDAG to do things like the Transnet revenue forecast, for instance. We use it for population growth. We use it for housing growth, et cetera. The next level up is predictive analytics. And this is where it gets really interesting. So if we knew what the traffic conditions were, and we were monitoring that, and we knew what weather conditions were like, we put that together, we would start to be able to figure out what the probability is that an accident is going to happen. So if you think about Highway 8, for instance, when you're going west in the morning and the sun is shining, but it's still raining, and that happens all the time, and you have the glare coming off of the freeways, we could start to predict where those accidents were going to happen based upon the data that was coming in from the monitoring. But what actions should we take? And that's where prescriptive analytics really has a tremendous amount of value. And this is where the future of data analytics is. Like, based upon that information, what we could do as an agency is start to, for instance, have the signs that that Caltrans has up on the freeway start to say, reduce your speeds. Okay, when the automobiles are all hooked to the next operating system, we could alert the drivers right to their dashboard to slow down because there's a potentially hazardous conditions coming up. We could redeploy our 511 vehicles to be staged where we believe the most accidents are going to happen. So this is kind of the analytic continuum. This is how information is created and how we get value out of it. So let's take a look at how we re-envisioned looking at our region through data science in terms of the people in the region. You know, when we take a look at the San Diego region, and we do a lot of work with demographics, we see there are about 3.4 million people in the region. That's expected to grow to about 3.7 million by 2050. We're the 5th most populous region in the nation. And when we look at our people demographically, we are younger, we're richer, and we're better educated than most of the rest of the nation. And this is great for certain types of businesses, for instance, high tech, because they're looking for people who have educations. And so that's why you see a lot of UCSD spinoffs, and you can tie that to a lot of the businesses that are in Sorrento Valley, for instance. And so we take a look at these things. And when we do our analysis, we do it for the entire region. But a lot of times when we present the data, we just look at the Western 1/3, which is where the incorporated cities are, because that's where the majority of our population is. So one of the things we started to do is to really look at data looking at it from population density, rather than taking a look at number of people per zip code or by city, for instance. We started to look at a density at a very low level. And this kind of gives us an understanding of where people are located throughout the region. We also look at age structure, because as we do this regional plan, we're building out for the future. We're building out for 2050. And so if we look at 2010, and this is the last census data we had, this is a population pyramid that we use that shows how many people we have in each 5-year age category. And you see that males on the left-hand side between 20 and 24, that bar sticks out. That's our military population. And then you can see as it goes up into the 65, 75, 85, 95 plus category, you see that we have fewer and fewer people of both male and female in the region. But take a look at what San Diego looks like in the future. And I'm going to go back really quickly just so that you can see. Look at it, especially at the top. You see how many people we have who are 65 plus. Now take a look. This is the baby boomers aging. And so the population that we're building for is completely different. The characteristics of it are different than what we have today. The San Diego region is going to look much more like a retirement community in 2050 than it does right now as a high-tech community. When we look at our age composition in a different way, what we see is that about 85% of the growth in population is going to be in the age 65 plus categories. So from a regional planning perspective, we take this population, this aged population, and we take a look at what is it going to take them to get to the activities that they need to do. So for instance, we need to have access to hospitals. We need to have flexible fleets that would be able to get us there. And so we take these type of things into account in our planning. Now, another thing that was very important that we looked at was employment centers. I just want to talk a little bit about how we create data here at Sandag. And so when you think about a zip code, or you think about a city or a jurisdiction, those areas are not equal size. And so it's very difficult to compare one to the other because the underlying geography is of a different size. So what we do here at Sandag in our data science group is to look at the data in equal areas. So we have the data down to a very specific point level. And Pat talked a little bit about this during his presentation. And what we've developed is this grid, which is really hexagons that are of equal area. And by using them, they approximate circles or radius. But the interesting thing is that they can now be compared directly to each other. So we can take a look at the amount of employment that's in those in terms of density. We can take a look at the density of population, and we can start to make objective decisions in terms of actual areas of where people go. So instead of using artificial boundaries like a zip code, we can now start to look at areas that really represent what is on the ground. And from that, we developed about 80 different employment centers throughout the region. And this is something that was invented here at Sandag, and we did it for the regional plan so that we would be able to really understand how people move, because most of the trips we take are trips that are going to the to work. And this is of course pre-COVID, but that will get back to where it was when we all go back to work. And so what you see here are 5 different tiers. About 83% of employment is represented in these. And each one of these tiers have different characteristics. The tier 1 employment centers, for instance, are the ones that have the largest employers and the headquarters. They have 8,700 businesses, and about 328,000 people work in these purple areas, and they have the highest wages. So we can start doing analytics by looking at this and give this data to the planning department, so the planning department can really understand how our jobs are distributed throughout the region. These are the tier 2 employment centers. These are all centered around healthcare and retail clusters, is what ends up happening here. These are the tier 3, which are smaller. These are mostly the construction and manufacturing sectors. And you also, if you look at it from a real estate perspective, the land values here are slightly less. And finally, there's tier 4. These are the local serving centers. These are the ones where you go to the local restaurants. There's a couple of them clustered together, or there's a strip mall and there's a grocery store, et cetera. And those are the local serving clusters. And so we can treat all of these differently. And when we design a transportation network, we can figure out what is the best solution to get people from where they live to where they're trying to go. So let's kind of zoom in, and this is the type of data we have. And I wanted to show you a little bit of this because we have this data available for all of your jurisdictions. So if you're interested, we can forward this information to you. But these are the East County employment centers, for instance. And some of the information that we can derive from there is not only the number of jobs and type of jobs that are in there, but how much VMT is being created by each one of these employment centers. If you think of an employment center, it's almost a living, breathing thing, right? Because it creates activity and people go there. And by the virtue of them going there, they create VMT. And so we can start to look at this and start to calculate information for our travel model on it, based upon it, also the regional plan. But also this data as a spinoff is something that can go back to the regions to help people make other decisions that you'd be doing at a local level. When we take a look at origin and destination, and this is a lot of the work that we ended up doing. We have about 50, this map shows the location of where people work who live in South County. And so in South County, is that yellow area, you see about 70% of the people have to commute out of South County to their jobs. And if you look at this and you overlay it with in your head with the employment center maps, they're going to the employment centers. That's where they're headed. When we look at South County also, we can take a look at where they're traveling and the number of people who are moving to each one of these. And this data, again, becomes a foundation for the regional plan. When we take a look at the Carlsbad employment centers, for instance, we can see where the people who work in these green areas, which are the Carlsbad employment centers, where they live. Those are the blue dots. You see that the most of them are around Carlsbad, but there are a lot of people who come all the way up from the border. The map on the right-hand side shows you 25% and 50% of the people and how far they live out away from that center. Again, for planning purposes, you can see how this would be useful to know how far away you have to move people to get them to where they're trying to go. We also took a look at the transportation network and we objectively said, does it work? Okay, so take a look at the distribution of where people live, which are these blue dots, and where they work, which is the green areas. This is the public transportation system on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is how far you can drive in 15 and 30 minutes, which covers that dark blue area. But on the right-hand side, you see that in 15 minutes, you can't even get out of the employment center. And in 30 minutes, you can barely get anywhere from Carlsbad. And so most people don't really have an alternative. And so we need to give alternatives if we're going to expect people to use public transportation or transit. And so in order to do that, by giving the planning department this type of data, they're able to start to understand where we really need to build out these systems. This is the same map for Sorrento Valley, and this is pretty much what it looks like throughout our region. When we take a look at Sorrento Valley, some of the analysis that we did shows where, again, the blue dots represent where the people live who work in Sorrento Valley. and we can dive in a little bit deeper and understand how they're using our infrastructure. So in this case, you see the percentage of the cars that are driving on those freeways that are headed to Serrano Valley, that their destination is Serrano Valley. So for instance, 5 North, 49% of the cars are at the Genesee or the Governor exit are headed to Serrano Valley. So what does that really mean? That tells us that 1 out of 2 people who are traveling here are going to the same place. Well, that starts to help us prioritize where we might be able to put alternative forms of transportation. What about flexible fleets, for instance? We might be able to look at a map like this that would help us understand how far away people live from where they're trying to get to. We also can figure out that about 50% of the people who work in Serrano Valley are actually concentrated in these hexagons. And this goes back to the equal area analytics that we did. And when we start looking at the concentrations like this, these start to help us understand where we might want to put some type of transit hub, for instance. So I want to talk
Major, sorry
Yeah.
to jump in here. I think that's some of the most impactful work that your team and our agency has been doing as part of this regional plan. So I wanted to make sure to do a check-in with the members, see if there's any questions, thoughts on this. One thing to reiterate, like Ray said, this is all information that you also can be using for your own jurisdictions. So please remember, we are here as a resource for you.
And I really wish we were doing this in person so we could just have a dialogue with this. It's kind of, these are difficult to do on Zoom, but, and I'm available to talk to you guys anytime you would be interested. This section now kind of, are there any questions, Robin? I don't see any, otherwise.
I don't see any other hand. Yes, Councilmember Shu.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick comment. I could, of course, talk about this for hours with Ray and others, but I wanted to commend Sandag. 10 years ago, the data that I would hear is analysis of how much the region was losing when someone is waiting on the freeway, stuck in traffic for 15 minutes. And at that time, my mind was, gee, how come we didn't measure the amount of time and resources we're losing when someone's waiting for 1 hour at a bus stop? Mm-hmm. And we've come a long way since then. So I just wanted to make that side comment to Ray and others, how far you've gotten. I have a lot of other concerns about and where we want to go, but I'll save that for later. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you very much. We are trying to use data in different ways, more objectively, and not just to justify why we would want to widen freeways, for instance, which is what you're, I think, referring to, is we were using data to justify what we were doing. Now we're using data to actually create the plan. Big data comes from everywhere, and it comes from things like sensors, and it comes from signals, et cetera. And there's different types of data. There's data that we actually could collect directly, things like the information on public transit, for instance. And then there's external data. For instance, a navigation app is built specifically to help you get from point A to point B. That's its primary purpose. However, that data is super valuable to us to understand how you got from one place to another, or when you went, or how long it took you. And that's really called data exhaust. And that starts to be the big data. Same thing with Google. Google knows where you're at all times. And so being able to know your location helps us understand a lot about our region. So when we take a look at the future of transportation, and let's just take a look at one of the external data sources, which is telematics. There's a tremendous amount of information that is being collected right now through in-vehicle feedback and fuel consumption, CO2 emission. All of this stuff is being collected, and we have access, or we're going to have access to this in the future. And this really is the foundation for what becomes the next operating system. So when we tie all of this big data together, the sensors, the signals, the cameras, and all of this stuff that's coming from Google, et cetera, we can now start to have a smart network and a smart system where vehicles are talking to each other, and we're creating a much more safe environment, and people can know how long it's going to take them to get certain places, because there's complete knowledge of what's going on. So big data is the foundation and future of our next infrastructure. You've seen these maps. But what these maps are taking big data for the first time and really starting to apply it to our regional plan. And so we started to take a look at origins and destinations, looking at the Google data really in terms of where people are moving around. And this shows you the critical connections, which are people going to employment centers. there's data that we had a really hard time collecting, like where do all the people go who come across the border? We have 34 million people coming across the border each year, busiest border crossing Western Hemisphere. Where do they all go? We now know, because we can look at them from using the Google data and understand what their destination is. The other thing that was very difficult to collect in survey data is that we're only looking at residents. Well, what about all the tourists who come to San Diego and they're going to Mission Bay Park or Balboa Park, or we go to Balboa Park? Those type of things weren't collected. Now we can see how people are moving to all of the major activity centers in San Diego. There was a question earlier by Councilmember Rodriguez, I believe, about Camp Pendleton. Military data, very difficult to get. We have an effort with the military to collect the data, but without them giving us the information of where their people live, we don't know how they commute. But using cell phone data, we now have an idea of how those trips are created through the region, so we can start to include these into our regional plan. And when you put all that together, you see there are a lot of lines on the map. That's what requires advanced data analytics and data science to really make a difference. In terms of activity levels and how we looked at this through COVID, for instance, we use big data. This is Google data, again, that told us where people were actually physically located, where your cell phone is located. And so before COVID, we indexed it to a 0. And you can see stay-at-home orders were issued back in March of last year. Business activity was down 30 to 80%. As we had the reopenings, you see people were starting to move back to those locations, and then we closed down again. So we can track this by industry. This type of data didn't exist a few years ago. And we're now using this to really understand, again, how people move around and how our businesses are being impacted by COVID. We have a lot of different metrics that we take a look at. I'm not going to go through all of these, but what this is showing is by industry, for instance, who's doing well and who's not doing well. Home and garden equipment, for instance, is the hottest thing in the last year because everyone's doing home improvement projects. Restaurants are hurting desperately, but we look at a lot of different data that we track on a regular basis.
If I may just to add a couple of things. First of all, I will guarantee you that Ray is not wearing a pajama bottoms because he's here with me in the office. So he's wearing a full suit. There will be no 4.4 million TikTok. His daughter posted that, and she got actually that right now is probably more views. But this is really important for the board member, especially the new one coming in. And very soon you're going to hear us asking you for budget allocation for data. And to Jack's point, there were so many things relate directly to transportation, to our communities' access to opportunities that we didn't even talk about. And we were actually a little bit shy of talking about them. So I appreciate Ray in the last year during COVID, with very limited resources, building the tools, getting some data. But I have to be honest with you, we're just scratching the surface. We're just it's like we're still at the bottom. And we're gonna move forward with this as staff to recommend to you that you pursue this as an agency, because frankly, your agency right now, SANDAG, statewide is viewed as a cutting edge when it comes to data-driven planning processes. Nationally, Ray and myself and Colleen will be speaking to the National Association of Regional Councils. We spoke to the administration. Again, SANDAG is a cutting edge. But I also do want to fool you that we've done a lot in this area. We just started, and much more resources needed. Collecting data the right way is not cheap. Building models and not easy, as Jack alluded to earlier in the discussion. But I promise you, this is what's going to guide our decision. We're going to go where the data takes us. We're not going to be political. We're not going to be, talking what people want to hear. We're going to talk like Ray just talked to you about the data. And I trust him and his team to get us there. And I think short of getting there, we will be in La La Land. And I think Councilmember Jack Shu alluded to it earlier. We have to drive our processes based on facts. Look, predicting the future is never an exact science. It never will be. But the better tool, the better data you have, the better you're equipped to make the right decision. So again, I think you have in your agency somebody like Ray, who's definitely have changed nationally and statewide the discussion about COVID. He was the first to put forth the zip code level data of who's impacted by COVID economically and from a health standpoint. And we're going to continue that moving forward.
Thank you. So just what Hassan's referring to here is some of the work that we did at the height of COVID to really understand which communities in San Diego were impacted the most. We took a look at unemployment data at a zip code level. We took a look at the incidence of COVID at a zip code level. We were able to put that data together and see which areas within our region and what zip codes were most impacted. And I think this is very helpful to the local elected officials to really figure out where do we need to focus the money and the help. For instance, it's which communities are hurt the worst. And we looked at this analysis by race, and what we were able to show is that the Black communities and the Hispanic communities here in San Diego are significantly more impacted. The probability that they live in a zip code that has high unemployment and high COVID was way higher than it was for the white and Asian communities. About 36.3% of the Black residents in the region live in a zip code that had both high unemployment and high COVID. So we can use this type of analysis to really understand our region. Contrast that with the white population over here, where only 12.5% were living in those zip codes, and about half, 49.7% of the white population lives in zip codes that had low incidences of COVID and low unemployment. It really kind of shows you which communities are being hit the hardest, and the size of the bubble shows you the number of incidents by the zip code. So we have that type of information. We also looked at information by tourism in terms of which job sectors lost the most jobs and how they've been recovering. We also were able to take a look at the data to understand when jobs did come back, who got them back. And again, this is very telling. If you take a look at the blue line, essentially, since COVID, all of those people have gotten their jobs back. In fact, that sector of the population has grown, but those people who don't have a college education, earning $15 or below, so the minimum wage employees, their unemployment rate is still about 24% because they work in industries right now that still haven't completely opened up: restaurants, retail, hotel, motel, et cetera. So we're able to have this type of information that we can give you so that you can make better, more informed decisions. And with that, I'm going to stop there. I have some slides about the long range forecast, but Robin wants me to stop so we can take questions. And so I will open it up for questions if anyone has any. Robin, I was going to say, I want to keep going because I have more stuff. So.
Thank you, Ray Major. We appreciate the presentation. So we have some time for questions, comments, discussion with our board members. I'll go ahead and start us off with one question though, Ray Major, just to warm you up. Okay, so don't we all already kind of know what the trouble spots are in the region? What is this data? Is it showing us anything new? What was the most surprising thing maybe that you saw out of the data? How is it really making a difference in how we put the regional plan together?
Well, what it's allowing us to do is, it depends which data you're referring to, okay? But when you're talking about the origin destination data, if you want to look at that specifically, our ability to define what an employment center is here in San Diego really made a very big difference, because it's not people traveling to San Diego for work. For instance, people go to Sorrento Valley and people go to downtown San Diego or Mission Valley for work. And there are different types of businesses there, and they have different types of employees who are willing to drive different amounts. So as you start to zoom into the data a little bit, what you see is that the 78 corridor, for instance, has a much tighter pattern of distribution. There people live closer to where they work if they work in that 78 corridor. They mostly live in North County. But when you take a look at areas like Sorrento Valley, they draw from the entire region. And by being able to visualize this stuff, we start to understand how people travel throughout the region. And that really helps us optimize the new system that we're building. So rather than just doing it alphabetically or doing it based upon the first thing we thought about we will build, we can now say what is going to have the biggest impact on reducing VMT, the biggest impact on reducing GHG, and look at that from a cost perspective and say, these are the infrastructure pieces we need to build first to get people to be able to move around the region. We can also look at this then, now that we've done this, and start to densify land use. And that's something that we didn't talk about in this presentation. But as we talk about densifying the urban area and the urban core, what we can start to see is how people move from one place to the other, and how that's going to impact travel, and how we can reduce our VMT and GHG by changing our urban form. And that type of analysis is something that, without the data, looking at it the way that we were looking at it, I don't think we really could have done that. We could have guessed at which areas that would happen in, but I don't think that we would have guessed all of them correctly.
That makes sense. It goes back to, I don't know if you heard in our first session, but we opened it up talking about how the regional plan is really about defining like the nervous system, the ecosystem for the entire region, putting on your regional hat and understanding, making a difference here will provide a benefit here. So it sounds like the data is what helps us really quantify how that all works together.
It does. It's objective, and you'll hear the planners who've been here for 20 or 30 years saying, I never knew that. Like they thought they knew where things were supposed to be, but the data shows that maybe that wasn't quite right. Maybe it should be over a little bit, right? Or kind of optimized in a different way. So it's exciting. It's just the beginning. I can't wait to do more, data analytics as it has to do with the regional transportation system. But for that, we need to staff up. So Mayor Huebner has a question.
Mayor Huebner.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Ray. This is very impressive. Really wonderful to see all of this, everything that goes into creating our transportation plan. I'm not sure how detailed it goes, but my question is, most people these days don't keep a job for 25 years like most of you at Sandag do. And so how is that taken into consideration in the model? And also, there's usually two earners in a home now, and one might be working close to where they live, and one might not be. So how is that factored in, or what does it tell you? And when we're densifying areas around job centers, maybe they're gonna live there and then they're gonna have another job somewhere else. And so
yeah, and that's a very good question. And so a lot of the information that we get, the base data, comes from the census or the ACS, the American Communities Surveys. So we kind of know where people are living and moving to, and we know where the businesses are. We also know that our land use isn't changing that significantly in terms of the fact that businesses are pretty much going to be located where they are now. In 2050, it's not like there are new employment centers that are going to be popping up just wholesale. We do take a look at whether or not there's one or two people working. We look at each individual person, but you're right. What ends up happening most of the time is that people don't change their home location, even if they change their job location. So if somebody was living in Carlsbad and they were working on Palomar Airport Road, but then got a job in Serrano Valley, they're not going to sell their home and move to Serrano Valley. What they're going to do is to lengthen their commute. And that's basically because they've created a community there, their friends are there, their kids are in the schools. And so we don't see people moving around as much. And this is evidenced all the way back to the 2008 census, where people would travel out of state to work, but they wouldn't sell their homes because they wanted to live in San Diego because their families were here. So we take this into account, but what we can also see is that by densifying in like the work live, and you start moving those closer together, it gives people the opportunity to move closer. Right now, we don't have the opportunity. So if you take a look at Serrano Valley, there's no way that you can get 226,000 people to live where they work, right? But if we can create communities over there, you will see the people who will tend to gravitate towards there are the people who probably are working there or have a job there.
Interesting. Okay. And then one other quick question is, and I'll ask this for my Del Mar neighbors, the temporary jobs, how is that counted?
So temporary jobs, it's an interesting thing, like you're referring specifically to the San Diego Fair. Yeah. And how those are. So we get information from the EDD on a monthly basis that tells us how many people are employed by different businesses. And there is an anomaly when it comes to Del Mar. And so, and the people who work at the Del Mar Fair. And so one of the things that we did is we used to take the data for the last 20 years. What we've been doing is taking one point in time. And I think it was a summer point that we took, like it was a June data. And so those temporary workers are counted as Del Mar workers or jobs in Del Mar. And so now what we're doing is we're starting to look at every month data, and we're going to be making adjustments for that. And that came out of some of the work that when Hassan and Colleen and I went and talked to the different, we went and talked to every city council who would have us. When we talked to Del Mar, they explained the problem, and we were able to look at why that would be in the data, and we're making improvements in it. There's no question about it that we can continue to improve our data.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Huebner. Doing a final call. Any last thoughts before we take a break?
I just, one final comment to the board members, especially the new ones. So, you know, forecasting is not an exact science. I just want you to know that. So oftentimes we forecast things, we forecast populations 30 years ahead of time. And we could be, you know, if we take historically our forecasts, we're actually within the realm of reality, you know, with a plus minus 5%. So don't be shocked if you see, you know, a difference in forecast. That's what forecasts do. What we're trying to do here is to do our best to make sure that what we're forecasting, which is going to impact our planning and our project development, is as good as it can be. But reminding you that we're just scratching the surface in this. We look forward to your leadership in making this agency what I think it could be. Honestly, we could lead the nation and the world when it comes to big data and open data. And we spoke to you, not the new ones, but those on the board. Remember, Ray made a presentation when I started at Sandag. And I would actually ask him to do it again, because it really highlights where we could be and where we can be. And with your leadership, I think we can get there.
Thank you, Hassan. Councilmember Shu.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, and there's no real response from Ray or Hassan that's maybe needed here. So there's so much data out there and so much more to gather, but I hope we ask the right questions and work on the right data to help our communities the most. And I'll bring up two areas just to give Ray more work, as if he doesn't have enough work. So I mentioned before, we can make a sociological difference if we look at the amount of money people are spending, or family income, combining housing and transportation costs together. And I've mentioned this before. I hope that's something we can venture into in the future, at least on a spot basis. So measuring the percentage of family income spent on housing and transportation combined, and trying to keep that below 50%. And we know that sociologically it's a real problem when that exceeds 70% of family income. So that's been tried in other areas. Another is that I know I've talked to Hassan before. AB 805 required us to look at health impacts of our transportation plans and projects. So I hope we can go into that. I think what Ray has just done with regards to COVID impacts is tremendous. It's very helpful for policymakers to understand that as we develop ways to maybe vaccinate different parts of our county. So I hope these are things that we can look forward to in the future to work on. And I think Hassan is right. We're leading other parts of the state and maybe the country with this kind of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Edson?
Yes. Ray, is there any data-driven estimate of the number of employees who will continue to be allowed to or encouraged by their employers to continue working from home post-COVID?
That is like a setup question, so thank you for asking it. We are currently fielding a survey, and it is a survey of both employers and employees that talks about work at home and tries to understand what the impact of that is going to be by not only geographic location, but also by different industries. And so we know that about 38% of the jobs are telecommutable in San Diego, but what we don't know is how many of those will actually be able to do that going forward. And that's where survey information is really important. So Rick talked about surveys, and the survey that we're fielding now will have about 2,000 respondents, which is statistically significant enough to give us a distribution by employer size. So we'll be able to see whether it's the bigger employers that are allowing people to telecommute, or 25 to 50 employee businesses, can they telecommute? And we're going to be able to, we'll put a report out once we fielded the survey, which is later in February, early March. But what it's really going to allow us to do is to see where we're going as a region in terms of telecommuting, and then enhance our modeling by being able to use those type of factors to really understand where those businesses are. We can now tie this all back to the rest of the data that we have. So that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to doing this year.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm curious to hear look at the reports when they come, because I think it's really an interesting topical impact.
It is. Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? Robin?
I don't see any other hands raised, so I think that will wrap up this session. We are going to be coming back at 11 o'clock. This is the big one, guys. We're going to be talking about the vision for the regional plan. You're going to see how all of this actually comes together. So you have 6 minutes, tell your friends, tell your family, sign on, learn, get ready to be inspired. We will see you at 11 o'clock. Okay, and with that, we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. So glad to be with you today, and live from the Sandag Vision Lab, we will be talking with you about the regional plan, the vision for the 2021 regional plan. I'm Colleen Clementson. I'm the planning director at Sandag, and it is my absolute honor and thrill to serve in this role for all of you. This is a time of rapid change across the entire world, and our region is a big part of that as well. And we have this tremendous opportunity to reimagine our region's future. And I am so excited to be able to do that along with all of you, and really empower our board to do something really fantastic over just the next several months. You've heard you've heard from the technical folks about how we do our modeling, what the mandates are that we need to meet. And after listening to the presentations, I feel extremely confident, and always have, but I hope you do as well, that we have extremely talented people here at Sandag who are going to make sure that whatever plan we come up with, we will meet our state and federal mandates, and we will come up with a plan that will dramatically improve the quality of life for all of our region's residents. I think what's particularly exciting is the work that Ray Major and his team are doing with big data, and the ability to use data in planning, not as we had in the past, which is all about taking public input and then using the data to validate the public input. It's the other way around. It's using data to help us do our planning, and then the public input helps to validate all of that. So really starting with the team that you'll be hearing from today, this is not just Hassan's plan or Colleen's plan. This is an agency-wide effort, and multiple staff members from throughout the agency has spent several months pulling together data, analysis, going through public input, researching the latest in transportation technologies and best practices from around the world, and then applying the 5 big move strategies to create this bold new transportation vision for the San Diego region. As a planner, one of the things that I think is so important is for us to really understand, what is it that we are solving for? And for this effort, it really comes down to 3 things: addressing traffic congestion, addressing social equity, and in particular, addressing the needs of communities that have been underserved for decades, and meeting our state and federal mandates. And what that boils down to with our state and federal mandates is addressing climate, greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle miles traveled, and clean air. Last year, we laid out an approach to developing this new vision using the 5 big moves, 5 interrelated strategies that rely upon one another, and each enhance the success of the other. So it's really important to recognize that none of these could stand alone. And then together, the benefit of really creating a system that works together and optimizes the investments we have today and what we have to look forward to in the future. We're going to share with you today the details of each element that's being brought together into this vision: complete corridors, transit leap, mobility hubs, flexible fleets, and the next operating system. And you're going to hear from each of the team leads on the data that they used, the strategies considered, and the proposed improvements from each of these. Key to all of this, we can talk about a transportation system, but it's really about the people. And a big part of this effort has been people first, using a human-centered design planning approach. And you'll hear more from the team about how that was deployed. Councilmember Edson, you brought up a good question about the pandemic and telecommuting. And I think none of us ever could have imagined that we would find ourselves in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. It's created so many unknowns. How long will it last? How will our economy recover? When will people feel comfortable taking public transit again? We don't have answers to these questions today, but we do know that things will get back to normal at some point. And once that happens, there's a lot of things that we can count on that are not going to change. The layout of the region is basically set. 90% of what is here now will be here for the foreseeable future. Our major residential areas, schools, job centers. We do know that more people will telecommute. I think all of us have learned that we're actually able to telecommute. I, for one, thought I would never be able to telecommute, but we've been pretty doggone productive. Not everyone can, and we know that people will still need to travel to run errands, go to school, go to health appointments, see family and friends, shop, and really just to go out and have fun. So we're continuing to monitor the impacts of COVID on transportation in the region and to continue to incorporate the latest thinking into our planning. So let me introduce to you now today's presenters. You will hear from Antoinette Meyer, who's our Director of Mobility and Innovation. She'll explain the process, the data used, and our human-centered design approach. Tueri Faola, Principal Planner for our Sustainable Development, will show you how data was used to develop the Complete Corridors network, including technology improvements that will help us manage traffic during peak hours of congestion and emergency situations. Jennifer Williamson, our Principal Transit Planner, will explain the Transit Leap, the types of services that are recommended, and the connections, the important connections that can be made through public transit. Marissa Mangden will explain the process used to develop a network of mobility hubs that will enhance access to Transit Leap and many destinations within our local communities. And Crystal Ayala will show you how the data was used to develop a proposed deployment of what we call flexible fleets. These are the vehicles that will serve our short trips within our communities and connect us to mobility hubs. So with that, I'll hand it over to Antoinette.
Thank you, Colleen. That picture was obviously prior to the pandemic when I was able to still get haircuts. I need to update it. Well, it's great to be back with you again today. Over the past 2 years, the 5 big moves have evolved from those high-level concepts into a complete transportation network that really seeks to make the most out of our current infrastructure. I had the great privilege of leading the team through a really rigorous process to develop the vision using data and public input in ways that we never have before. So I'm going to step you through the data-driven planning process, and then I'll turn it over to members of the vision team to walk you through their networks. Next slide, please. So the plan development process was actually new and innovative for SANDAG. We developed the vision over 3 phases. So the first phase was focused on developing the 5 big move concepts to address specific transportation challenges, like meeting our regulatory requirements, which you heard about earlier this morning, and addressing congestion. During this phase, we spent a lot of time listening to people to gain a really deep understanding about their personal transportation challenges. And then we immersed ourselves in the data that you heard about from Ray this morning to get a clear understanding of how people need to and want to move around the region and where there's gaps today. The second phase was focused on problem solving. So the team took all of that data and started to identify those critical connections that people need to make, and then built out initial networks that made those connections. And then in the third phase, we refined those networks. We brought in new data, we conducted more analysis, we brought in outside experts, and we rigorously tested and refined the networks to get to where we are today. And then to complete this work on a really compressed schedule, we used an agile project management approach that's called sprint planning. Tech companies often use this approach for product development because it breaks down really complex and complicated projects into short sprints, and it provides the project team to be able to have the flexibility to adapt to changes as the project evolves. So talking with as many people as possible was a really important part of our planning process. We delivered hundreds of presentations around the region. We organized a number of interactive workshops and webinars. We have an amazing group of community-based organizations that help us reach underserved and underrepresented populations. And our Vision Lab hosted open houses and student events, and we had regular community hours. Over the last year, we actually pivoted and we brought the Vision Lab online. It's now virtual, and we continue to host community hours online on a weekly basis. To engage residents, though, in a more focused conversation, we used a new method called human-centered design. And like sprint planning, this is a technique that we borrowed from the private sector. Tech companies have used human-centered design to develop user-friendly products and services. It involves having in-depth conversations through interviews and focus groups to really understand the problems that people face, and then develop and test solutions that address those problems. So rather than a one-time event like a workshop, we're able to have ongoing conversations with a group of people who don't typically participate in the planning process. And actually, if you're interested in hearing from some of those participants, we have a video that features interviews with them on the San Diego Forward website. Through all of our outreach, there were some common themes that emerged, and none of these themes are surprising or new, but they confirm what we've been hearing for a long time. A lot of the comments are about transit and how people would like to take transit, but it just doesn't work for them today. People express concern that transit doesn't feel comfortable or safe, it lacks adequate security. We also have heard a lot about how transit just takes too long. It's not frequent enough, there aren't good connections to and from transit, and people don't feel like the transit network is complete. It doesn't connect them to the places that they need to or want to go. And then this lack of frequency and connectivity really impacts the quality of life for residents that rely on transit. They don't have other transportation options available to them. Beyond transit, we heard a lot about challenges with the lack of school bus service. This complicates commutes for parents, but it also creates serious traffic and unsafe environments around schools. We heard a lot about unsafe conditions for people walking and biking and using micromobility. People enjoy doing this, but they're fearful of riding in roads with cars, and they would like safer infrastructure. People generally plan their lives around traffic. They avoid certain areas like Sereno Valley altogether at certain times of the day. And everybody wants their commute to be reliable. They want accurate and timely information. They want it to be comfortable. Because we're planning for the future and technology has been evolving incredibly quickly and having a big impact on transportation, we assembled a panel of industry experts to provide input on technology solutions that could make our transportation system work better and be safer and more resilient. Our vision advisory panel consisted of 11 Southern California industry leaders who really provided insights into how technology will evolve and how we could apply it to the transportation system. All of this input helped us to shape the 5 big move concepts and start to illustrate the possibilities for a future that provides a better experience for everyone. This illustration demonstrates how a typical highway could be transformed into a complete corridor that accommodates all modes and uses technology to operate the system in real time, responding to demands. You'll see that we have the full range of transit leap services integrated with dedicated space so they can offer a fast and reliable service. Similarly, our range of flexible fleets are accommodated with space that is safe for smaller modes and HOV lanes that make rideshare and microtransit a little bit more competitive. And then the next operating system is working in the background. It's making everything work using data and technology, managing how lanes are used in real time, depending upon demands. You know, at certain times of the day, lanes could be dedicated to freight or transit, or when there's an incident, a lane could be dedicated to emergency vehicles. And last, our mobility hubs. Mobility hubs come in all shapes and sizes. This is a very urban example, but at their core, all mobility hubs are communities where there's a range of travel choices that come together seamlessly, and it is safe and easy to get around without a car. So now we are going to explore how the data informed the network development process. You heard a lot about this data from Ray M in the previous presentation. I said Ray M because there's Ray T and Ray M. We started by analyzing commute trips, which tend to be the most predictable. And actually 1/3 of all trips in our region are work related. You saw these maps earlier, but just as a reminder, the map on the left is population density. The map on the right are the region's largest employment centers, which host more than 40% of civilian jobs. We then used census data to begin to make the connections between where people live and where they work. And at the regional scale, starting with the map on the left, those blue dots represent, again, those major employment centers. And then the darker lines represent more people traveling to their jobs in those employment centers. Then we simplified this in the map on the right by aggregating lines to see where the highest concentration of commute trips occur. Work trips are not the only trips that people need to make though, so we brought in cellular data to do the same type of origin destination analysis for places like the border and our beaches and parks, which are popular destinations. Our military bases are major regional employment centers on their own, and the map on the left shows all of the trips that are going to the military bases every day. And then when you look at everything combined, you can really start to see where the highest volume of travel occurs in the region. There's a large portion of trips in the western third of the region, and many of those trips are traversing the north-south corridors. We brought in demographic data to assess how equitable our transportation system is and if it's meeting the needs of our disadvantaged communities. And we also considered our population forecast to understand the future population that we need to plan for. We know that low-income workers are much more likely to depend on transit, and today only 7% of our region's low-income residents have access to fast and frequent transit. 20% of transit riders don't have access to a car. They spend twice as long commuting via transit as people who drive. 10% of our population has a disability, and many disabled people have specialized transportation needs, and we've heard that those needs aren't being fully met today. And you saw from the previous presentation that our population is aging. 13% of the region's residents will be 75 or older by 2050, including me. So we need to be planning now for a transportation system that will keep seniors mobile and connected to their communities. We also considered environmental factors. Transportation is a large contributor, the largest actually, to greenhouse gas emissions that lead to climate change. If we do nothing, temperatures and sea levels will continue to rise and will be at a greater risk for more frequent and devastating fires and floods. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to the team leading the development of the Vision Network, and they're going to describe the process that they went through to identify the right transportation solutions. So we're going to start with Tueri, and she's going to walk you through complete corridors.
Thank you, Antoinette. So good morning, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you. You'll continue to hear us say that a lot of data was used throughout this planning process, and I'm going to walk you through some of the data that went behind the development of the complete corridors. So in addition to all of the data and community input that Antoinette spoke about earlier, we also reviewed existing highway data for, and you can go ahead and click, I think Go ahead and bring all three actually onto the screen. Thank you, right there. So we also reviewed existing highway data for trip distances, daily traffic volumes, and travel delay. And all of this information helped us to group together the corridors that had similar characteristics. So for example, as you can see here on this map, we grouped together our major north-south corridors of Interstate 5, the 805, and the 15. These are our interregional corridors. 60% of the trips on these corridors are over 20 miles, as they're typically used for traveling longer distances, and they're really important for goods movement within our region, and especially for moving goods across our borders. And these corridors also account for the most freeway vehicles mount travel and delay during our peak hours. Similar data was used for other corridors, as you can see here on the map, to group them. But one noticeable difference you can see in all of the data that's here is that the rural corridors, while they have similar trip distances between 5 and 20 miles, which is similar to our urban corridors, they collectively account for the least amount of vehicles mount travel in our region. So taking all of this data into consideration, this map shows the possibility of a complete system of managed lanes that could operate very similar to what many of us may have experienced if you've traveled on Interstate 15's express lanes, whether if you've traveled on them as a carpool, you're on Rapid, which receives priority access, or if you're a solo driver who's paid for access using Fast Track. But the possibility of this type of managed lane system was designed to not only include previously proposed managed lanes, but also a complete system so that you could use the lanes for your entire trip, not just for short trips on a single corridor. So here you see the potential number of managed lanes for each corridor on this map. For those major north-south corridors, they're shown in lime green that I mentioned earlier. This is the Interstate 5, the 805, and the 15. They have the longer trips and the most congestion in our freeways in the system, but we're proposing 4 managed lanes. You'll also see that we propose 4 managed lanes in that same lime green for State Route 78 as well as for Interstate 8. And the other urban corridors are highlighted in blue and purple, where we've proposed a mix of 3 lanes that could include a reversible lane during the peak hour conditions, or it's 2 lanes, and that's really matching the needs of what we observed when we were looking at that data for what should be recommended for each of these freeway facilities. But before I leave this slide, I do also want to mention the rural corridors, which are shown in that darker green on the map. And we believe, we talk about the interreliance of all of the different moves, but we believe that technology and the next operating system could really help us to manage traffic conditions during peak hours, as well as emergency situations, coupled with site improvements such as shoulder widenings to allow for safe passing. We also see its role in traffic management by giving travelers real-time information and using technology to reassign lanes as they're needed to add capacity during events or emergency situations. But I'll show you a couple of visuals to help explain this in some of my upcoming slides. But again, beyond those technology investments, we really do envision that the rural corridors could have those shoulder widenings, realigning our curves for safety, or providing intersection improvements, all of this focused on increasing safety, access, improving travel reliability, and the movement of goods within our system. So putting some of this into examples that are within our region, this is an image of State Route 78. It's a typical freeway with 3 lanes of traffic in each direction. And you can also see that there's enough space on both the inside and the outside of the shoulders. So using the complete corridors concept, this illustration really lets you visualize how we could repurpose those lanes in that existing facility and the shoulders to add 2 managed lanes that you can see here in the center of the freeway, which would give priority access to transit or carpools or other shared rides. We could also utilize technology through the next operating system to provide the travelers with real-time travel information. And then with technology, you could even imagine how the lanes are used in real time to better manage congestion and incidents. And if you give it one more click, I think it'll highlight here how you can see on the real-time message board that this is an image that's helping to direct traffic to the left. And we know that traffic incidents often contribute to some of the worst congestion that drivers experience on our highways. So this type of technology could be really useful in managing that. Okay, so we can't talk about highways and not think about our local roads that run parallel to them and provide access to them. So we see an opportunity to really redesign our streets using infrastructure that is also supported by technology, again, helping us to increase capacity and access and to create a safe space for everyone. So we use similar types of data that I explained to you earlier that we looked at for the highways, but we looked at that at the local arterial level, and we analyzed the local roadway network and considered also our existing regional arterial system to develop what's seen here in this map, which is the Complete Corridors Regional Arterial Network. And this network, along with technology investments, could improve access to our major employment centers, access to and from freeways, and offer transit better reliability. And then active transportation also plays an integral part in creating a multimodal complete corridor network that creates a space for people who walk and who bike. And so we layered in our adopted 2050 regional bike plan as part of the regional complete corridors arterial network as seen here. So again, it's great to really see how things that we talk about can apply here locally within the San Diego region. And this image is the intersection of Main and Magnolia in the heart of El Cajon. And it shows, as you can see already, the existing wonderful redevelopment efforts that have already been implemented within the city. But similar to how technology is important to our freeways, I've said that it's important and we see its role at the local street level. And in this example, you can see that we've applied smart intersection technology, which allows for a safer environment for vehicles and people who walk or people who bike. And as technology advances, vehicles, bikes, and other devices will communicate with that smart signal, creating a safe and efficient intersection and a more comfortable experience for everyone. And this is especially important as we talk about our senior population and our disabled population as they're trying to navigate our local streets. And smart intersections can also give priority to emergency vehicles or our transit vehicles, making them more competitive and more reliable for those who are using it. So with that, I'd now like to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to talk about Transit Leap.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's Jennifer Williamson, and I'm a principal planner here at Sandag. We've heard from our residents that while transit works for some folks, for many, it's not a great option over the car. We've heard that transit needs to be better than it is today. We've heard those concerns, and I think what we're going to show you today will offer a more comprehensive transit system that will provide a better alternative for all of our residents. One of the first steps in developing the transit network is establishing the types of services that we're designing for. The routes, stations, and supporting infrastructure are then developed around these service types. The Transit Leap network includes 5 different types of services. The passenger rail routes, similar to the coaster, will be designed to be grade separated from cars. So basically, they'd be operating in tunnels or bridges, and this will allow the trains to operate faster, up to 110 miles per hour, traveling longer distance in shorter amounts of time. Our goal with these services is to provide travel trip times that are comparable to the automobile. Our second type of service is one that everyone is familiar with. It's the trolley or the Sprinter line. And we're going to take these services and upgrade them further. We're going to provide grade separation at major intersections to separate and reduce conflicts with cars. We're going to look at all of the stations and see if we can remove unproductive stations to allow the services to travel faster. And the operating hours will be increased to allow people to utilize the services for a longer operation throughout the day. What we've heard from people is that many people need to use these services up to 20 hours a day. Not everyone is working a fixed 8-hour day as they have in the past. Our next service is one that people are very familiar with, and you've gotten your first taste of that. It's the next generation rapid services. We have our existing rapid services. You may know them on I-15, El Cajon Boulevard, operating along 805 in the South Bay County. We're going to take those routes and make those better. We're going to take everything we learned and add more priority lanes, better signal technology, longer spans of service, and shorter travel times to get people where they want to go faster. Our final two services are local bus services and flexible fleets. And you'll hear more about those from Crystal later. What we learned from our outreach is that people want transit to go where they need to go and to get them there faster. For most commute trips, people need to get transit as close to their employment centers and their homes as possible. This is where understanding the data and commute patterns come in. We're going to take all that data that Antoinette shared with you earlier, and we're going to start to match these up to our trip demands, matching the primary employment centers with the areas that have the highest densities of populations. We begin to see where some connections might be achieved. This first set of matches that you see on this slide, we're really just taking the dots and developing lines in between this. This resulted in about 5,000 different combinations of trips, and we know that it's not achievable to offer that many services. So then we began an iterative process to refine the potential connections to these routes. We looked at things like access to mobility hubs, activity centers, and points of interest as key factors in determining which routes would be defined from these lines on the map. After the connections were identified, the possible routes were ranked and re-ranked. The travel capture areas were developed. We started to see some distinct lines develop, and those are the ones that you see over here in the slide. This created our first set of possible commuter rail routes. The data was really showing us something that we've known all along, that possible commuter rail routes really made the most sense in our longer trips, and those going from north to south and the denser areas of East County. Our final step in refining our commuter rail network was to evaluate which routes rose to the top. Criteria was used to help us to refine these routes and look at the different segments to determine where the segments were going to have the most potential for ridership. The criteria included demographic data, socioeconomic data, equity analysis, and good old-fashioned planning principles. These criteria each received a score that allowed us to develop propensity, and that's that's what you see over here in your slide. The linkages with the darker pink and purple colors, and you see those in the center of the region, those have the highest scores and the highest propensity to provide a high level of ridership. The areas in blue and green have the lower scores. But if you'll click again, we know that's not really the end of the story. We also had to evaluate where there's existing infrastructure and where freight was operating. And so the I-5, even though it doesn't pop on the propensity map, we know that that's an important corridor where we've invested a lot of money for our low sand services and provides a lot of access and functionality for freight use. And here you see our proposed transit network. I always feel like this needs a big voila moment. This is a comprehensive system of commuter rail, light rail, and next generation rapid services. The network will provide fast and frequent service. We've designed this to provide 10-minute service or better throughout the day, will be separated from congestion, and in many cases offer travel times that are comparable to the automobile. Now let me take you through these. The first line you see on the map is our coaster corridor, expanded to go all the way down to the border and connect to our cross-border terminal. This line would be fully grade separated and provide access. The second line that you see on the map is what we refer to as, or you might have heard referred to as, our purple line corridor. And that emulates the coaster corridor, but it bisects the center of the region, providing important connections to our central areas and providing direct travel to employment centers in Mission Valley, Kearney Mesa, and Sorrento Valley directly. Our next line on the map is that connection I mentioned earlier from East County into downtown San Diego. This line would provide both access to downtown San Diego from El Cajon and areas east, and then also to our central mobility hub. And next you see the full network being refined here. The purple or the magenta lines, if you will, are our light rail network. And as I said before, these services would be assessed to provide grade separation at major congestion points, providing easier movement throughout the region. We've also provided a tram service that you see in the square in the center of that map there that would provide important connections through the center of our urban community areas. The network of rapid services would be expanded, and those are shown in green on the map here. They would be given priority treatments and offer faster and more reliable travel. The network also includes special projects such as future connection to the airport via People Mover. And also the teal dotted line shows a future California high-speed rail connection that could connect our region to areas outside of the region up to LA and then Riverside counties. So let's see what the region could look like with Transit Leap. Here is San Ysidro today. It's not very appealing, and it has very limited bus access adjacent to the trolley lines. Let's see what it might look like in the future. This is an example of what San Ysidro Mobility Hub could look like in the future. As you can see, there is a rich network of mobility options. Both Transit Leap and a wide range of flexible fleets make it easier for people to get to the border and get to where they need to go. And let's look at this again. Here's San Ysidro again. This is what it looks like as you're waiting for the trolley today. The area is constrained in space and lacks amenities. And let's see what it might look like. Again, here's an example of what our commuter rail service could look like, adjacent to the trolley and adjacent to higher land uses, a much richer network of services. So how is our service improved and what does it do for us? Today, only 5% of people in the region are within 10 minutes of fast and frequent transit service. Once our Transit Leap network is in place, this number could rise to 55%. As I've mentioned before, we heard that people want longer service hours. Today, only 8% of the population has access to transit that has longer service hours. Today, just a handful of trolley and bus routes operate with 20 hours of continuous service. With the implementation of the Transit Leap network, this increases to 60%. Finally, we evaluated what level of access our communities of concern have to the transit network. Today, only 7% of low-income residents have access to transit that operates every 10 minutes throughout the day. With the implementation of the Transit Leap network, this could increase to 50%. Now I'm going to turn it over to Marissa to tell you about mobility hubs.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll be walking you all through how we developed a regional network of mobility hubs. These are the areas where we have higher concentrations of people, places, and travel options. I'd like to just reiterate that when we talk about mobility hubs, we're not merely thinking about placing a handful of services at a single transit stop. We're thinking much bigger about how a lot of travel choices, safer streets, and supporting technology can be spread across town. Whole communities comprise a mobility hub. Long story short, mobility hubs do two things: get people to and from Transit Leap and make it easier to handle shorter trips without needing to rely on a car. Residents have made it clear they want to feel safer while waiting for transit or riding a bike. All of our proposed mobility hubs help address this by creating spaces where people feel both comfortable and respected as they travel from one part of the region to another. Mobility hubs and Transit Leap are intrinsically linked. So we collaborated to examine the more than 60 major commute origins and destinations to assess where hubs could be situated. But work trips only tell part of the story. So we leveraged data from Analytics, a third-party data source, to evaluate top non-work destinations in the region for increased insight as to where mobility hubs could be placed. Next, we carried out a robust analysis to determine which areas demonstrate higher levels of mobility hub propensity. Criteria examined included current and forecasted population and jobs, proximity to regional activity centers, presence of senior, minority, and low-income communities of concern, walkability combined with levels of short trip making as well. Looking at the map on the right, each census block group was assigned an overall score, with green representing higher levels of hub propensity. This helped us to quote unquote right size all mobility hub areas based on characteristics that lend themselves nicely to mobility hub investment. Residents also indicated they want to see mobility hubs connected throughout the region, particularly to major attractions and the airport. The resulting mobility hub network displayed here does this and more. The network is comprised of our urban core, plus 30 more mobility hubs that are all connected by transit leap and complete corridors to serve a large amount of employment and leisure destinations. Our urban core includes downtown and a variety of urban neighborhoods, everything from City Heights to Midway. 4 gateway hubs serve as key entry points into the 5 Big Moves network. 8 employment centers, many of which could offer mixed-use development opportunities, and 8 coastal hubs that are popular seaside destinations for residents and visitors alike. Last and certainly not least, we have 10 suburban, mostly residential neighborhoods situated near transit leap routes. It's within this mobility hub network that you'll see the highest concentration of transit leap and flexible fleet services, while enabling complete corridors to prioritize flow of next-gen rapid, on-demand shuttles and active transportation solutions. By 2050, we anticipate these hubs will cover approximately half of the region's residents and more than 2/3 of the region's jobs, making them great opportunities to boost the live, work, play lifestyle. And with nearly half of our region's trips being 3 miles or less, mobility hubs offer a really unique opportunity to transform how we move around our communities using pedal bikes, e-bikes, mopeds, and more. It's also really important to gauge how well these mobility hubs cover our communities of concern. Based on our latest forecast data, it's anticipated that by 2050, mobility hubs will cover approximately 60% of low-income households, as shown in the map on the left, more than half of all minority residents displayed in the map in the middle, and half of all seniors, 75 and older, shown in the map on the right. Let's take a closer look at 2 potential mobility hubs in the region. On the west end of the urban core, a central mobility hub could be a key convergence point where many transit services from across the region come together. The days of I-5 dividing my uptown community from Midway would be a thing of the past, as people would have a plethora of options to reach this anchor transit station for work, leisure, or air travel. And a new people mover could connect the hub to the airport with fast and frequent service. This station could also include a wide variety of micromobility options coupled with safer bikeways, new housing and commercial development in the surrounding area. Take just a moment to imagine the experience here. The chic architectural design exudes a strong sense of place and well-being as people make their way from retail and dining spots to their next destination, all while enjoying the backdrop of San Diego Bay. And for those needing to make regional and international connections, lower levels could offer high-speed commuter rail, light rail, and an automated people mover to the airport. Clear and intuitive wayfinding would make navigating the hub a breeze, and interactive travel planning kiosks reminiscent of world-class airports would help ensure everyone is on time to catch their next train, despite squeezing in that quick cold brew purchase. Now, please follow me up the coast to the city of Oceanside. Oceanside Transit Center is already serving as a key interregional connection point for many rail services. The station and surrounding community could be transformed into a fully functioning gateway mobility hub. We heard from residents around the region that transit stations can often be uninviting, not well lit, and lack comfortable seating. Mobility hub improvements could offer a new type of waiting experience at OTC by offering complimentary Wi-Fi, mobile device charging points. There could be dedicated bike share parking corrals to keep the platform clutter-free, and parcel delivery lockers to make it convenient to pick up a package before jumping on the coaster. Taking a 10-minute walk over to Mission Avenue at Nevada Street, we could see how shared mobility services and amenities expand far beyond the transit center to help bring this gateway mobility hub to life, while building upon traffic calming measures the city's already successfully implemented. Mission Avenue now boasts a mix of driverless shuttles, shared fleet of mopeds, electric vehicle charging stations, and mixed-use development that all work together to complete this vital mobility hub in North County. And visitors from other parts of the region would feel right at home in a new city, knowing it's so easy to get around. I'll hand it off to Crystal to share more details about flexible fleets.
Thanks, Marissa, and welcome to all of the new board members. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you the development of our flexible fleet strategy. So far, our team this morning has shared some of the important feedback that, along with data and our analytical tools, helped guide the development of this regional vision. Well, this sort of public input that you heard from Antoinette earlier was really at the heart of our flexible fleet strategy, which envisions providing shared, on-demand services that provide fast, easy, and convenient options. Now, there are many opportunities for flexible fleets in the region. You'll often hear us refer to these as use cases. Flexible fleets could improve transit accessibility by providing quick connections to and from transit leap and mobility hubs. Or for people who don't want to or can't afford a car, shared services could be available on demand and travel on the complete corridor network that Tueri walked you through to take you where you need to go safely and efficiently. There are many flexible fleet services that are actually already operating in the region. So to help us understand what services exist and where different types of services could operate best, we conducted quite an extensive case study research to categorize and group services with similar features. So our 5 flexible fleet service types are actually shown on this slide here. And at the top, we have micromobility, which includes low occupancy, low speed devices like bikes and scooters. These services are typically best suited for shorter trips, although motorized services like electric bikes, e-bikes, allow users to travel much further without breaking a sweat. Ride-hail services, most made popular by Uber and Lyft, can be requested in real time for a ride from a driver. Or if you prefer to drive yourself, CarShare allows you to reserve a vehicle on demand as a short-term rental. Rideshare services provide shared rides for people headed in the same direction. This includes carpool and vanpool, which are services that have long operated in our region and provide an alternative transportation option for suburban and rural community members. This also includes new ride-sharing options provided by pooled ride-hailing services like Uber Pool and Lyft Shared. Our 4th category is microtransit, which uses on-demand shuttle services to provide trips from door to door. And this also includes smaller all-electric shuttles like the Fred service in downtown San Diego that caters to shorter trips within a neighborhood. And lastly, in the past few months, we've seen a huge shift to online retail and online shopping due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and last mile deliveries using new approaches like e-bikes, drones, and delivery bots to help make efficient deliveries to our homes and package delivery lockers. Several of these may not sound new to you. In fact, we heard that many people are already aware of a lot of these services. They just can't imagine how they might use something like micromobility or ride hailing beyond social or recreational purposes. So the research we conducted gave us really great insight into how flexible fleets can be designed to serve all types of trips, not just the fun ones. Now, many of the flexible fleet services are enabled by technology and operated in partnership with the private sector. So the importance of forming collaborative partnerships with flexible fleet providers is really important to proactively plan for what's on the ground now, while also maintaining an eye for the future, since we know technology is going to continue to evolve. So to augment our research, we also interviewed flexible fleet companies, some of which are represented on the slide here. And some of the key takeaways from those interviews included the importance of having dedicated infrastructure like curb space, lanes, and electric vehicle charging to ensure services can operate safely and efficiently. And companies were also largely supportive of policies and operating incentives that encourage ride sharing and ensure services are operating equitably. Now, we can't really talk about a partnership without also talking about the importance of having the community at the table. And we heard similar feedback from community members in our network of community-based organizations about the importance of taking a holistic and integrated approach to designing flexible fleet services. This helps to ensure that flexible fleets are meeting a community's needs and catering to our diverse populations. This might mean designing services to provide affordable options for low-income families, offering accessible vehicles for community members with disabilities and seniors, and also creating choices for non-smartphone users and credit card holders to also access these new options. We also heard that it's really important for flexible fleets to be convenient to use. Community members shared that on average, they wouldn't want to travel longer than 10 minutes via flexible fleet to connect to transit. So this kind of input played a really big part in shaping how we envision flexible fleets integrating and connecting to the transit leap network. Now, the growth and popularity of flexible fleets has largely been enabled by innovation and technology. And these new ways of traveling have transformed our travel experience. And as technology continues to advance, we anticipate vehicles will be evolving and integrating new amenities that make it easy to share the ride. So smaller right-sized microtransit vehicles like this one on the screen could integrate with our local buses and evolve to be connected and driverless. The modular design you see here means that vehicles can link together for added capacity based on changing demands throughout the day. And amenities like space for personal belongings, car seats, privacy screens, and an onboard ambassador helps ensure that user needs are accommodated while also maintaining passenger safety and privacy. Now, we also know that public health is top of mind. So onboard amenities like a cleaning robot to regularly sanitize the vehicle will also be an important component in future rideshare vehicles to ensure riders feel safe. So let's take a quick look at flexible fleets in action as proposed in this regional vision. The North Park community today is a critical origin in our region, with a lot of people that live in this area traveling to Sereno Valley for work every day. Through this vision, major streets like El Cajon Boulevard could be transformed into a complete corridor that meets the needs of all people, whether walking, rolling, or riding. Those wanting to use an active option could use micromobility services on dedicated lanes, walk on our wider sidewalks, and sidewalk delivery bots like the blue one here on the lower section of the screen could deliver small packages to people at the transit station. People could also easily book an on-demand shuttle for visiting all of the great local coffee shops, breweries, and restaurants that our region has to offer. And those commuters traveling from North Park to Sereno Valley could hop on an on-demand shuttle at the many pickup zones in North Park and hop onto the Transit Leap station for an easy transfer to Sereno Valley. Now, we know from the Employment Center analysis that Ray Major shared with you a little earlier today that Sereno Valley is the region's largest employment center with over 129,000 employees traveling here on a daily basis. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, that meant that half of the people driving on I-5 during the morning commute were actually headed into this employment center. With this vision, people otherwise stuck in traffic today can now hop on the new high-speed commuter rail, relieving some of the congestion on our highways. And flexible fleets of all sizes would provide employees, students, and visitors with convenient access to all of the opportunities that Sereno Valley has to offer. We've heard that transit riders today also experience challenges with the first and last mile from the Coastal Sereno Valley transit station. And with so many people traveling here during peak commute hours, both transit vehicles and personal vehicles alike experience delays on our roadways. This not only impacts highways, but the local roads within the Mira Mesa community. While complete streets improvements along Mira Mesa Boulevard would make walking comfortable and safe, and micromobility options like e-bikes and scooters could finally be a match for Sereno's challenging and steep topography. A mix of transit and flexible fleet services would frequently serve the area, providing connections from the commuter rail station to your office, and could also leverage priority curb space to safely pick up and drop off riders. Next, Antoinette is going to share how the last move will make sure all of these services are integrated into our transportation system and operate seamlessly.
So the last big move is the technology and the data that works behind the scenes to make everything work together as a complete system. And we've coined this the next operating system, or the next OS. The next OS is a digital platform that uses the big data we talked about today to manage the transportation system in real time and to deliver new applications and tools to the public, to operators, and planners and policymakers like all of us. Let's take a quick look at how the next OS combined with all of the moves can improve the commute experience for a typical commuter in our region. So this is Laura. She lives in Southeast San Diego with her family, and she works at Sharp Hospital in Sereno Valley as a medical assistant. Laura and her husband have one car that they share, and her husband often needs the car for his job. So she has to find a way to get her kids to school and get herself to work. Today, Laura doesn't have very many options that are viable because she works as a medical assistant, her schedule is varied, and sometimes she works late at night or very early in the morning when transit service isn't available. And even when she works regular hours and can take transit, it triples the amount of time it would take her to drive. But when she does drive to work, her commute time is still unpredictable. If there's an incident or congestion, there aren't any express lanes that could offer her a faster trip. In the future, though, with the next OS and the 5 big moves, Laura will have more choices and better information and tools that will make her travel easier. She could hail a pooled ride and travel in the express lanes for free. She could take fast transit, or she could drive alone and pay to use the express lanes and park, which is the most expensive option. Laura chooses transit, though, because it's available when she needs to get to and from work. It's as fast as driving, but it's free because her transit pass is subsidized by her employer, Sharp. Her son bikes to school now because there's safe, complete corridor infrastructure in her neighborhood, and Laura gets a little notification on her Next OS app when her son arrives at school safely. She's able to take her daughter on the train and drop her off at a daycare in the mobility hub, and she has Wi-Fi on the train and can order her groceries from her smartphone to be delivered at the mobility hub locker for her to grab on her way home. This is the experience we want everyone to have in the future, travel that is easy, convenient, and even enjoyable. So we shared a lot of maps and information really quickly today. I want to highlight that we do have an interactive map that we've developed for you and all of your communities use to explore the specific projects in the vision on your own time. It's called our 5 Big Moves Data Viewer, and it's available on the San Diego Forward website. Here's just a couple of screenshots that show the type of information that you'll find in the data viewer. So if you click on a mobility hub, you'll be able to learn about the different transit services and fleet options that are envisioned to serve that hub. If you click on a complete corridor like SR 52, you'll learn more about the proposed improvements for that roadway. And then if you click on a transit leap line, you can learn about frequencies and service hours and specific routes that serve that particular area. So with that, Colleen, do you want to wrap up the presentation?
I will wrap up. So thank you so much to this amazing team. Today we've shared with you a vision for making a safe, reliable transportation system for the region. Whether you live in the most urban areas or the far reaches of the county, this is a vision that will meet our state mandates, reduce traffic congestion, and address social equity. And it builds on what makes this region so special. The vision for the 2021 regional plan is a long-term investment in our future, developed through analytics and data and input from the community. It's a vision that includes a fully connected network of managed lanes, improvements on our rural roadways to ensure safe and equitable access to meeting daily needs, a state-of-the-art high-speed transit system that provides a compelling option to driving that's convenient, safe, affordable, and gets people where they need to go. It includes commuter rail, light rail, and rapid services. It's a network of mobility hubs, centers of our community that provide access to high-speed transit, multiple travel options, and places for people to gather. A deployment of flexible fleets to provide options to how we make short trips within our communities and get to transit, an alternative option to actually having to own a car. And of course, this is all tied together with technology to ensure that we make the most of our current and future investments. This is meant to be a flexible system that can evolve as technology evolves. Next week, we'll be presenting to the board of directors to share how this vision actually becomes a plan. So with that, I know Hassan, you wanted to thank the team. If you want to join me here, or is he going back to his, he's heading back to his space, and then happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So if I may, Colleen, thank you, Colleen. Colleen and I are in the same place, but if I go with her, I'll have to wear the mask and I won't hear me. I have heavy accent to start with. So I just want you to know that you just seen the start of this agency. Literally, these are what makes me look good most of the times, because these are the people who you just heard from. These are the people who made the unveil at the highest level of the agency with Ray and Colleen and Antoinette and their teams. And I can tell you how proud I am of these folks who never ever looked at it from any other than what's the best for the 3.4 million San Diegans. You're going to hear from them a lot in the next year. Actually, the whole year is going to be devoted to finalizing the 5 big moves and making it a plan. And I meant it when I said yesterday, when you call any of them, you get a better answer than you would from me. I am so proud of them. They redefined what planning is, and truly they are the stars of the agency. So with that, I'll turn it back to Colleen and Ray for questions and answers.
Thank you so much to everyone. We do want to make sure we take some time to hear back from our board members now. I know some of you have seen parts of this presentation before. For others, this was brand new. Tell us what you think. Did you learn something new today? Did something surprise you? Looking for any feedback from you as we head into next week and our presentation to the board. We'll take a second and look for hands to be raised. Don't be shy now. Okay, Colleen, I think that means the plan's perfect. We're ready to go.
Woohoo!
With that, Councilmember Shu, I knew we could count on you.
I make sure I wait long enough so that other board members and others on the call can chime in if they want, because I really don't want to be the only one that comments on or have questions. It's so hard to sell people on a new product, and so I'm always worried that we'll have the best plan, the best 5 big moves plan, but it's really hard to sell it because people don't know what it looks like and how it works, and we don't know how it's going to really work either. So my question is there any plans to implement portions or demonstration projects right away? So let me give you an example. I really like the idea of flexible fleets, or particularly micro transit, or maybe a combination with rideshare. And I've heard about other experiments in other communities in which something like that had been done, as well as the idea of virtual bus stops in which we don't have to have fixed routes in bus routes. So I'm thinking, why don't we start with a demonstration project somewhere? Let's go to National City. Let's go to a transit hub that we have now, or something similar to that, and give it a try. And try it for a short while. See how it works. See how we can improve that. And the community can see how well something like this can serve that community. So, because I don't want to wait any longer. I want this to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, 10 years. So maybe
Councilmember Shu, you hit it on the nose. You hit it on the nose. And we will be talking about some of that next week in the presentation with the board, but absolutely, we need some early wins. We are extremely pleased that we got a very large federal grant to do work along the border. And part of that will be to do a pilot of flexible fleets at the San Ysidro Transit Center. It's a perfect place to do it. It's already happening informally, and how we can formalize that and truly make it work. There are others in the works, and you're absolutely right. We got to grab some of the low-hanging fruit as we do the big planning for the big infrastructure projects at the same time. So thank you for that comment. Stay tuned for more, and we'd love to engage with you more about some additional ideas that you might have.
Colleen, can I ask you for you to talk for a second about the coordination that we've been doing at the local level with each of the jurisdictions as we put this plan together, and the coordination that we're going to need from each of the local jurisdictions in order for the plan to be successful?
Thank you, Robin. We've been working closely with all of the public works directors and planning directors from each of the member agencies, with the transit agencies as well, the planners, to make sure everything is aligning, because the fact of the matter is this plan is only going to be successful if we're all coordinating. There's a tremendous opportunity right now, given that the County of San Diego is working on their climate action plan, City of San Diego is working on their climate action plan, and that can really maximize all of the things that we're talking about here in the regional plan. So critical will be our alignment with land use and the transportation investments that we're making. That's what makes this work. As we focus on the urbanized areas of the region, it really allows us to maximize the opportunities to preserve open space in our backcountry. All of that contributes to this region reducing greenhouse gas emissions and contributes to the quality of life in the entire region. It's not just what happens on the regional system either, it's the local streets and roads. So as important as land uses are, and Tueri brought this up in her presentation, how important it is that we work very closely on what happens on the local streets and roads to ensure that we have a multimodal transportation system. It's walkable, it's bikeable. We are able to utilize safely flexible fleets on local streets and roads, and how we then access regional transit and the fully connected managed lane system. So excellent question. We are working hand in hand and need to continue to do that. And truly, this is a commitment on behalf of SANDAG to work with all of you.
And then just one follow-up, if I may. I'm still looking for hands from some of our board members, but just equally as important, right, is the work that we're doing with our partners across the border, both US, Mexico, and our county borders and our tribes. Of course, I know we've been doing unprecedented work to work with our partners there as well, if you'd like to speak to that.
We are very proud of our work with the 17 tribal governments in the region. You know, this is one of the reasons that improvements on the rural roadways are so important. This is the access to our 18 tribal nations in the region. Across the border, we're continuing to hold regular workshops. We've actually done 2 with our partners from Mexico, because that, as you're saying, Robin, how we connect, we're one big mega region, and all of that access is so important. So thank you.
Thank you. I've seen a couple cameras come on. Does that mean we have comments? Councilmember Sankey? Councilmember Castile? Yes.
I'll jump in real quick and say how excited I was to see the little ferry boat down there in the bay. I'm super happy that those are continued to being looked at, particularly because the comment earlier about the low-hanging fruit. There's zero requirement for right-of-way. So there's real opportunity there to help the military out. And I noticed in Antoinette's presentation that military commute trips were included. Although when you looked at employment centers, I was sad to see North Island and the Naval SEAL Base and the new facility just north of Imperial Beach not included really. I'm hoping that as that goes forward, planning for those particular installations and all the other naval installations that are impacting traffic in our area is included, particularly along the National City Corridor at 32nd Street. And so deconflicting the rail and light rail and heavy rail in that area will make a big difference. And some of the, I'm sure this is big thinking and included in the planning. So not so much a question, just a thank you and a pat on the back, because there's a tremendous amount of work that has gone into this, and seeing it put together over the last 18 months or so has been a real treat from a planning perspective. And I'm hoping that the board is receptive and starts to find that low-hanging fruit and starts to prove to our region the neat things that we can do with this program, and also lead the way for the bigger ask of our region when it comes to the measure that will suitably need to come forward to pay for this thing. So anyway, thanks so much. I appreciate an opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Castile, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I was hoping that someone could speak to the trend toward driverless cars, because I don't think I heard where that figures into our planning.
It actually does, Councilmember Castile, but you know what, Antoinette, you've been on the cutting edge of all that, our vision advisory panel. Do you want to jump in and kind of talk about where we see that and kind of when that comes into the plan? That'd be helpful.
Well, there's just a lot of speculation about when autonomous vehicles will be in the region. Some projections are within the next 10 years and others, that it will be 20 to 30 years before we really see anything, but we did certainly account for it. So I know we went through the flexible fleets portion of the presentation really quickly, but Crystal shared that our vision is that these flexible fleets are going to transition to be autonomous in the future. So she showed a microtransit vehicle that was autonomous, and a lot of those conceptual designs included autonomous as well. So it's definitely on our radar. We are tracking the research closely. Our vision advisory panel included industry leaders in automation to help us kind of understand when and how we should be incorporating automation into the plan. So appreciate you raising it, Council Member, and just know it's definitely something we're thinking about.
I'm also asking them about flying cars, just so you know. Keeping our eye on the future.
Sir, how are you?
Council Member Edson, did I see you? Yes, there you are.
I have my hand up. Thank you. So what most interests me, I mean, it's all very interesting actually, but because my city is along the coastal corridor and I serve on North County Transit District and also on the board of LoSAN, I'm interested in the LoSAN corridor, coastal corridor. It's shown on slides 43, 44, 46, and 47, I think. And I can't tell whether it's moving from its current location or proposed to move from its current location, because it appears to me to be east of 5 versus west of 5 where it is today. So I stay continually curious and am interested in learning more.
Councilmember Edson, the goal is to stabilize the bluffs in the short term and move it off the bluffs in the long term. And so that's what the regional rail corridor study that's underway right now is looking at. So great question. Jennifer Williamson, is there anything you want to add to address Councilmember Edson's question?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We are working with the LoSAN group right now on their high-speed rail study. So in the foreseeable future, we're anticipating that we're just going to be making improvements to the existing rail corridor. That being said, we are evaluating an option to get the corridor off the bluffs, as Colleen said. And then also kind of an exciting piece of that is that once we get it off the bluffs, can we get it further up to Sorrento Mesa? Right now, that line stays just west of I-5. And we'd like to see that line go further up so it really penetrates those employment center, or that employment center of Sorrento Mesa. So it's kind of a multi-piece effort along the LoSAN corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, last.
Robin, could I just do something quickly?
Of course.
For everyone who's still here with us, I just want to take a minute, and I know she's going to be really embarrassed, but Allison Wood is our awesome project manager for the regional plan. She's been behind the scenes helping us. And Allison, I know you're back there. Can you turn on your camera so we can all see you? And thank you for all the work you're doing for us. There she is. Allison, thank you.
Virtual round of applause for you, Allison.
Thank you. I love supporting this team.
Okay, last call. Yes, Councilmember Castile.
Yeah, you might have covered this, but I didn't quite catch on the last mile. The most common problem I hear about is either that people don't live close to a bus stop, or their job or where they need to go isn't close enough to a bus stop. So can you explain to me how people would achieve that last mile, or in some cases it's the first mile?
Councilmember Castile, that's the flexible fleet. That's exactly what it's about. So whether it's walking, so you have a safe place to walk, it's an e-bike or a bike share, a scooter, but it can also be car share. And so that is probably one of the biggest innovations with all of this, and what technology really enables is closing that gap in the last mile with the use of flexible fleets.
I mean, are we, because I know a lot of, and sometimes people take a taxi. I mean, what's the most likely thing to connect someone if their bus stop is a mile from their job?
So I think it depends upon where somebody is in the region. But again, that's, you may need a flexible fleet from your house to get to high-speed transit. And then you take the high-speed transit to your job, and then maybe you can walk, or maybe you need a flexible fleet on the other end. The point is, you don't have to have your own car on each end. These can be shared vehicles. And ultimately, like you were asking earlier, these are shared, electric, so they're clean, and ultimately autonomous. So, we set this up to utilize the latest technology so that it can really be flexible.
Okay, thank you for that, Colleen. Would you like to share any final thoughts, parting words before we move on to public comments?
Lots of exciting work ahead. Thank you all for being with us today, and really look forward to your input and feedback as we refine the vision into the plan.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you to the whole regional plan team. We know how much work you put in, not only to today, but to the regional plan itself. So we're all looking forward to your presentation next week to the board of directors. We'll now take public comment on the item from today, then non-agenda public comments, and then we will wrap up our member orientation. Francesca.
Thank you, Robin. As Robin mentioned, we're going to be taking comments on the presentation now. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question to any of our panelists, please use your hand raising function in your Zoom, and I will call on you. All right, seeing none. We'll go ahead and move on to non-agenda public comments. So if you have a comment or a question you'd like to ask about something not on the agenda today, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll give you an opportunity to speak. All right, well, I am not seeing any hands. So Robin, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you to close this out.
Thanks, Francesca. So we just want to say thank you again so much for everyone that participated in our inaugural member orientation. We hope that it was helpful. Please know that this is just the first of what we hope will be many informational exchanges with all of you. If there's anything in particular you're interested in, please reach out. We're always happy to talk and meet with you and share information and learn from you as well. So on behalf of Francesca, myself, and the agency as a whole, thank you very much. Have a great day, have a great weekend, and we will see you soon. Take care.